The catch pole hit the deck before Odell's Vray understood it had been dropped. It bounced once, rang, and skated across the polished floor of weighing bay 4, and behind it came the man who had been holding it, handler second-grade Emon Brask of the Draken Apex Transfer Guild, 300 kilos of plated muscle, moving backward at a speed his species was not built for. He did not turn to run. That was the part Vray would remember. Brask kept his face toward the animal the whole way, one arm out for the doorframe, retreating like a man backing off a ledge he had only just noticed. The animal had not moved. It sat on the entry ramp of the containment sled where the guild had parked it, a mass of tawny and black hide the size of a supply crate, and it watched Brask leave with the mild, unbothered interest of a creature deciding whether the departing thing was worth standing up for. It decided it was not. It yawned. The yawn was enormous and slow and ended in a small sound, almost a groan, and a rope of saliva swung from its jaw and fell to the ramp, and the animal laid its great head back down on its forepaws and closed its eyes. "Log the time," Vray said. His clerk, a nervous junior named Pole, did not log the time. Pole was pressed against the rear bulkhead with the rest of them, and his translator was making a thin, whistling noise that meant its owner had stopped breathing correctly. "Pole the time." "It looked at Brask," Pole said. "I saw log it." Vray was a weights and manifest officer of the Sarin Concord, 40 years in the service, and in those 40 years he had learned that the universe was a machine for producing empty fields on forms, and that his entire purpose was to fill them. The field in front of him now was empty. It was labeled Mass Standard, and it belonged to line item 9A on Transit Manifest 44 Osprey, and until a number lived in that field, the Concord Transport steady hand could not depart, 41 other manifests could not close behind it, and Odell's Vray could not go home. The animal on the ramp weighed something. Everything weighed something. All Vray required, of the whole snarling apparatus of specialists and hazard plating and expensive terror assembled in his bay, was that one of them convince the animal to stand on a scale for the length of a breath. So far 4 of them had tried. 4 of them had failed. The scale, a broad plate of brushed alloy set flush into the deck 12 meters from the sled, remained clean and unweighted and reading, in patient green figures above it, 0. "Where is Brask going?" Vray said, watching the handler reach the doorframe and slide around it and vanish. "Away," said Pole. "I can see that. He is contracted. He signed the sheet. I don't think the sheet is going to help us." Across the bay, at a respectful and increasing distance from the sled, the remainder of the guild team had gathered into a knot. There were 6 of them left. They were the finest Apex transfer crew the sector could field. Vray had checked the credentials himself, because the credentials were what justified the invoice, and the invoice was obscene. The Draken Apex Transfer Guild moved things that could not be moved. They had extracted a nesting thresher worm from a colony's water table without a single casualty. They had relocated a bonded pair of ridgeback maulers across 4 jump gates in sedation cradles. There was a plaque somewhere with their motto on it, which translated roughly to "We carry what kills," and the plaque was not considered boastful by anyone who had seen the invoices. They were now arguing in low voices about whether the readings could be trusted, and not one of them was looking away from the animal. Vray crossed the bay to them. He was Sarin, slate-skinned and long-limbed and built for offices, and he came up only to the chest plate of the smallest of them, and he did not care. "Warden Owl," he said, "you are behind schedule." Warden Sethrex Owl turned. He was the crew's master, an old drock with a face like a cracked anvil and one milky eye, and he had, in the file, personally supervised the removal of a Category Sable ambush crawler from an occupied hospital. His hands, Vray noticed, were not quite steady. "Officer," Owl said, "we are refusing the contract." "You cannot refuse the contract. You signed it. It is a lawful transfer order for a single ambulatory specimen from the quarantine kennel to the calibration scale, a distance of 12 meters, and you are the certified handlers of record. We are refusing, Owl said again, and something in the flatness of it made Vray stop. He had heard fear before. He processed frightened people daily, smugglers, deserters, colonists whose cargo did not match their forms. This was not that. Owl was not sweating or shaking or reaching for the release clause language every contractor learned by heart. Owl had the specific stillness of a man who had made a decision and would rather die than unmake it. And behind him, his crew had the same stillness, and all of it was pointed at a sleeping animal the size of a crate. "Explain it to me," Vray said. "Slowly, there is a form." "There is always a form," said Owl. "There is, and I intend to fill it. Explain." Owl lifted his good hand and pointed, not at the animal, but at a hardpad slave to the guild's own gear. On its face glowed the readout of a biohazard assay. The standard sweep the guild ran on anything before they touched it, measuring mass, musculature, reflex latency, jaw closure force, threat affect. A dozen numbers that told a trained handler exactly how a thing would try to kill them and how long they had to prevent it. The numbers were red. All of them were red. "That is a scanner error," Vray said, because it was the reasonable thing to say. "We calibrated it on the crawler," Owl said. "Twice. The crawler read amber. This reads at the ceiling. Jaw force at the ceiling. Reflex under the floor faster than the instrument counts. Threat affect." He stopped. "The instrument does not have a word for the threat affect. It gives a number and then it gives a warning that the number may be a malfunction because nothing produces that number." "And yet," Vray said, "it is asleep." "Yes," said Owl, "that is the part." Vray looked at the animal. It slept. Its flank rose and fell with a slow, gusting rhythm. A paw twitched. It made in its sleep a small, contented noise. It was, by every visible measure, the least alarming object in the bay. The alarming objects in the bay were 6 armored professionals who moved things that killed for a living, standing in a frightened cluster 20 meters from a sleeping animal, and refusing an obscenely well-paid contract to touch it. "What is the part?" Vray said. Owl was quiet for a moment. "When Brask went in with the pole," he said, "the specimen woke. It did not rise, it did not bear anything. It opened its eyes and it looked at him. And Brask has caught 900 live transfers in his career, officer, and he has never once in 900 transfers felt the thing he felt when it looked at him." Owl's milky eye caught the light. "It looked at him the way I look at a manifest. It looked at him like paperwork, like a thing already sorted and filed and of no further interest. He put the pole down because his hands would not keep holding it. That is the part." The whistling from Pole's translator got louder. "It's a pet," Vray said. "I beg your pardon." "It is a companion animal." Vray tapped his own pad. Line 9A manifest declares it as accompanying auxiliary fauna, terran origin, belonging to a member of the human liaison delegation traveling on the steady hand. It is not a hazard specimen. It is not a war beast. It is registered as a pet. Warden Owl looked at him with the exhausted patience of a professional being told his profession by a clerk. "Officer Vray," he said, "whatever the humans call it and whatever they let it sleep on, my instruments say that if it decides to cross this bay, no one in this bay decides otherwise. Read your own register." Vray read his own register. He had not until that moment read his own register, because the register was a downstream document and his job was the manifest, and the manifest said pet, and so pet was the word he had been working with. But there was a cross-reference field, a small one, linking line 9A to the Concord hazard register maintained by the biosecurity office 3 decks down, and Vray, because he was a thorough man and because the bay had gone very quiet, followed it. The animal's entry in the hazard register was long. It had been assessed on arrival, as all incoming fauna were, by an automated gate scanner, and then, when the gate scanner refused to issue a clean pass by a live biosecurity officer, and then when the live biosecurity officer refused to issue a clean pass either by a panel. The panel had produced 11 pages. Vray read the summary line, which was the only line most people ever read, and the summary line said, "Classification, Apex, confirmed. Register Class 9. Transfer to be conducted by certified hazard contractor only. Uncertified personnel prohibited within containment perimeter." Below it in the notes field, a biosecurity officer had added, without any apparent irony, a single sentence. "The Terran handler insists the specimen is friendly. See attached behavioral log. The specimen's friendliness is not in dispute and is not relevant to the classification." "Class 9, Vray said aloud. "Class 9, Owl agreed. Vray had processed one Class 9 before in his life. It had been a captive apex drake from the Ulva Reefs, and it had taken a guild crew of 11, 2 sedation gantries, and a reinforced cradle to move it 40 meters, and it had cost a colony's annual budget, and 3 of the 11 had retired afterward. That was Class 9. He looked again at the sleeping animal. "There has been an error in the classification," he said. "There has not," said a new voice. The bay's rear hatch had cycled. Through it came a Saren in the pale blue sash of the biosecurity office, younger than Vray, with the brisk, unhappy stride of someone who had been summoned from an early meal. Vray knew him distantly, Assessor Kell, from 3 decks down, the officer whose signature was on the 11 pages. "Officer Vray," Kell said, "I heard the transfer had stalled. I came to tell you before you did something regrettable. There is no error in the classification. I made the classification. I stand behind it. And I will tell you what I told the humans, which is that I have never in my career been so unhappy to be so certain." "It is a pet," Vray said a third time, and heard how thin it had become. "Yes," said Assessor Kell, "that is precisely the problem. Come and look at what a pet is." Kell had brought his own pad, and on it he had the behavioral log, and he walked Vray through it standing well back from the sled while the guild crew watched the animal, and the animal, mercifully, went on sleeping. The specimen had arrived 4 days earlier aboard the human transport Anselm, in transit, requiring a manifest relog for onward passage, a routine thing, the kind of routine thing that filled 90% of Vray's working life. The gate scanner had flagged it in the first 3 seconds. Biosecurity had quarantined it pending assessment. And then, Kell said, the trouble had begun, because the assessment kept coming back the same and no one believed it. "We ran the standard fauna battery," Kell said. "Mass, dentition, musculature, sensory acuity, threat modeling. The threat model is the one that matters. You feed the instrument the physical parameters and it returns a projection, what the animal could do at maximum to a standard person in the first 2 seconds of a committed attack. It is a conservative model. It assumes the animal is unskilled and unmotivated. For a mid-tier predator, it returns something like significant injury, survivable. For a Class Sable ambush hunter, it returns fatal, 1 target. And this. For this, Kell said, it returned fatal, all targets in the enclosure, before intervention is possible, and then it asked me to confirm the enclosure size because it assumed I had entered it wrong. I had not entered it wrong. I entered it again. It returned the same result and appended a confidence rating of 99.6%. He put the pad away. "I have assessed 412 species, officer. I have never seen the model apologize before." "That is a model," Vray said. "Models exaggerate. Where is the actual behavior? Where is the incident?" "There is no incident," Kell said. "None." "None. That is the second problem. In 4 days of observation, the specimen has done nothing hazardous. It has eaten. It has slept. It permitted a physician adjunct to look at its teeth. When the quarantine junior dropped a tray, it did not startle. It has, on 2 occasions, leaned its entire weight against the observation glass and gone to sleep against it, and the glass is rated for pressure and it groaned. Kel's mouth did something complicated. We have a Class 9 apex predator with a threat projection off the top of the instrument, and a 4-day behavioral log that reads like the diary of a very large, very tired grandfather. And that, Officer Vray, is why no certified handler in this sector will put a poll on it. Because the file does not say it is dangerous. Any handler can move a dangerous thing. The file says it is dangerous, and it has chosen, so far, not to be. And there is no plating in the galaxy that protects you from a thing that is only calm because it has decided to be. Somewhere behind them, one of the guild crew said something short, and the others answered it, and Boots began to move toward the hatch. Vray turned, Warden Owl. "We are leaving, officer." Owl had his crew moving in good order, gear abandoned where it lay, catch poles still on the deck. "File whatever you must. Bill us the penalty. My people will pay the penalty out of pocket and count it cheap. We move what kills. We do not move what forgives, because a thing that forgives can stop. You are contracted." "We are gone," said Owl, and they were. The hatch cycling shut behind the last broad back, and the bay was suddenly, enormously quiet. Vray stood in the quiet with his empty field. Mass standard. Above the clean scale, in patient green, 0. On the ramp the animal slept. Its flank rose, its flank fell. In its sleep it made the small, contented noise again, and the noise carried across the empty bay, and Assessor Kell flinched at it, and Odals Vray, 40 years in the service, connoisseur of empty fields, understood that he had a very long day ahead of him, and that somewhere on this station there was a human who owned this thing and let it sleep on furniture, and that he was going to have to go and find her. He looked at Pole. Pole had slid to the floor. "Get up," Vray said. "We are going to find the human." "Do we have to?" said Pole. "There is a form," said Vray, and went to find her. Cass Dunmore was in the delegation's cramped transit quarters, sitting on the floor with a boot in her lap and a brush in her hand, and she was not brushing the boot. She was brushing empty air in long, even strokes, the way she would have brushed him if he had been there, because it was the 4th day he had not been there and her hands had gotten into the habit of him. She caught herself doing it, set the brush down on the boot, and looked at the little transit clock on the wall, which she had learned to read in 3 alien timekeeping systems and now hated in all of them. 91 hours. That was how long the Osprith Reach had kept Biscuit in a box 3 decks away from her because a machine had gotten scared of him. She was 23 years old, a Terran auxiliary handler on a 2-year rotation, which was a grand title for a job that mostly meant paperwork, kennel duty, and translating between the core animals and the aliens who did not understand that they were animals. She was not decorated. She was not tall. She had a plain, tired, freckled face and short brown hair. She cut herself in coveralls with a coffee stain on the left cuff that had survived 2 washings, and she had exactly one thing in the galaxy that was entirely hers, and they had put him in a box. The door chimed. Cass got up off the floor. The alien in the doorway was slate gray and long and official, in the plain sash of some office, and behind him, a younger one of the same species was visibly trying to stand somewhere that was not directly in front of the door. The tall one looked at her, and then looked past her into the room, checking. She watched him do it, checking whether the animal was in the room with her. "He's not here," Cass said. "You know he's not here, you've got him. You are the Terran handler of the specimen on Manifest 44, Line 9A, the tall one said. His translator gave him a dry, careful voice. "Odals Vray, Waits and Manifest." "Cass Dunmore. Is he all right?" The question seemed to catch the alien off guard, which told Cass most of what she needed to know about how the last 4 days had gone on their end. "The specimen is unharmed," Vray said. "The specimen is in excellent health. The specimen is the single healthiest thing on this station, and I would give a month's pay to be rid of it. May I come in?" You can come in if you tell me why you've had my dog in a box for 4 days. Vray stopped. That is the word. Kel used the word dog. That's the word. Vray came in. The younger one did not. The younger one stayed in the corridor with the doorframe between himself and the room, which, again, told Cass a great deal. She'd been on the reach 4 days. She knew the shape of this by now. Miss Dunmore, Vray said, I am going to be direct because I have been on my feet for 11 hours and there is a transport that cannot leave and a form I cannot fill, and directness is all I have left. Your dog is logged in the Concord Hazard Register as a Class 9 apex predator. I need its mass. To obtain its mass, it must stand on a scale for the length of a breath. To make it stand on a scale, station law requires a certified hazard contractor, because uncertified personnel, that is you, are prohibited within the containment perimeter. I hired the finest hazard contractor in the sector. They arrived 2 hours ago. They have just left. They have abandoned the contract, forfeited their fee, and departed the station, and the last thing their master said to me was that he does not move things that forgive. Vray spread his four-fingered hands. So I have come to ask the owner of the animal a simple question, and the question is, what, in the name of every quiet office in the Concord, is going on? Cass looked at him for a long moment. He's a Mastiff, she said. I do not know what that is. He's a dog. He's an old English Mastiff. He's 9. He weighs about 100 kilos, which is what you'd know if you just let me put him on the scale 4 days ago. His name is Biscuit. He has hip dysplasia and he snores and he's afraid of the recycler when it cycles because it's loud. And he has never bitten anything in his life, including the vet, including the time the vet had to do a thing that I promise you he did not enjoy. She folded her arms. And every single one of you has decided he's a monster because a machine ran a number. And now you've spent, what did that contractor cost? Vray told her what the contractor had cost. Cass was quiet for a second. You could have bought a house with that, she said. On Earth, a whole house. To not move my dog 12 meters, when I could have done it in 10 seconds 4 days ago if any of you had let me in the room. You are uncertified personnel, Vray said. It is prohibited. There are 11 pages. I've read the 11 pages. Your assessor Kell gave them to me. Page 6 says the specimen's friendliness is not in dispute and is not relevant. Do you know how insane that sentence is? You wrote down that he's friendly and then you wrote down that it doesn't matter. Because it does not, Vray said, and for the first time there was something under the dryness, something Cass recognized because she'd heard it in her own instructors and in the biosecurity assessor and in the physician who'd looked at Biscuit's teeth with a device that shook. Miss Dunmore, I am a clerk. I fill fields. I do not frighten easily because nothing in an office is frightening. And I stood in that bay an hour ago and watched a sleeping animal open one eye at a professional, and I watched the professional's hand stop working. I have read the threat projection. Do you know what the model returns for your dog? I know exactly what the model returns, Cass said quietly. The Corps ran the same models before they cleared him to travel. I've seen the number. I know what he could do. She looked at the boot on the floor and the brush. That's not the part you're getting wrong. You've all got the number right. What you've got wrong is that you think the number is the animal. The number is what he could do. The animal is what he does. And what he does is sleep on my feet and steal socks and lean on people until they sit down and pet him. She looked back up. He's not calm because he's harmless. You're right about that. He's calm because he's got nothing to prove. There's a difference and it's the whole difference and none of you can see it, because where you come from a thing that's strong would be using it. Vray was quiet. That is, he said finally, approximately what Assessor Kell said. He said it more unhappily. Yeah, well, Kell's the only one of you who's actually watched him. Cass picked the brush up off the boot. Take me to the bay. Take the perimeter down for 10 seconds. I'll walk him onto your scale, you'll get your number and the transport can leave and I can have my dog back and everybody can stop paying for houses they don't get to live in." "I cannot," Vray said. "Why not?" "Because the perimeter is not mine to lower. It is set by station biosecurity law, which is set by the overseer's office, which answers to the Concord Integration Protocol, which is being audited, as of this cycle, by a visiting review panel that arrived yesterday to determine whether the human delegation in its," he paused on the word, "auxiliary fauna can be safely integrated into Concord traffic at all. That is why your dog cannot simply be released to you. If I lower a Class 9 perimeter for an uncertified human, and the review panel learns of it, I will not merely have broken protocol. I will have proven, on the record, that humans do not respect containment. And they are looking, Miss Dunmore. They are looking very hard, for a reason to say no." Cass sat down on the edge of the cot. "So that's why nobody's let me near him," she said slowly. "It's not just the machine, it's politics." "It is always politics," Vray said. "The machine is only the excuse. If your dog were a mid-tier predator, the excuse would be too thin, and someone would have let common sense in through the side door days ago. But it is Class 9, which is a real number and a defensible one, and so no one will touch it, because every official on this station is now standing behind a wall the machine built, and the wall is a good wall, and there is a review panel taking notes." He looked again at the door, at his own junior cowering in the corridor. "And there is a transport that cannot leave, and a form I cannot fill, which is the only reason I am standing in your quarters, breaking the chain of protocol far enough to ask you a question I am not supposed to ask." "Which is what?" "How do you do it?" Vray said. "Kell watched the animal for 4 days and he cannot understand it. The guild moved a hospital's ambush crawler and they ran from your dog. And you brush the air where he should be and you talk about socks. How do you walk a Class 9 apex onto a scale in 10 seconds? What is the trick? If I understood the trick, I could perhaps find a certified party willing to." "There's no trick," Cass said. "There is always a trick." "There's no trick. That's the thing you all can't stand. You keep looking for the mechanism because you're all engineers of fear. You build cages and doses and poles, and you think handling an animal is a system you apply to it." She shook her head. "It's not a system. He's known me since he was 8 weeks old. I fed him. I taught him. I slept next to him when he was scared of storms, and he slept next to me when I was scared of worse things. That's it. That's the whole trick. There's 100 kilos of animal down in your box that could clear a room in 2 seconds, and the only reason it doesn't is that a long time ago a person he trusts told him he didn't have to, and he believed her, and he's still believing her, 4 days alone in a box, because that's what the bond is." She looked at the little clock. 92 hours. "He's been believing me for 92 hours in a box, Officer Vray, and I would like to go and be worth it." Vray stood in the small room and did not say anything for a while. "I cannot lower the perimeter," he said at last. "Not on my authority, but I can do one thing. The mass must be logged before Steady Hand departs, and Steady Hand departs in 19 hours, and the review panel wishes to observe the log being taken as part of the integration audit. They have requested it, in fact. They wish to see how the human delegation's Class 9 specimen is handled. It was to be the guild demonstrating it. The guild is gone." He looked at her. "So there will be an audience, Miss Dunmore, in 19 hours in Weighing Bay 4, of Concord reviewers who have come specifically to find a reason to say that your kind and your animals do not belong in civilized traffic. And there will be an empty scale, and a form I cannot fill, and no certified handler in the sector willing to fill it." "Then let me fill it." "I am telling you," Vray said, "that in 19 hours the pressure on this bay will be very great, and that great pressure does strange things to protocol, and that a clerk of 40 years knows exactly how much a wall is worth when a transport cannot leave and a panel is watching an empty scale." He moved to the door. "I am not authorizing anything. I am a clerk. I fill fields. But I would advise you to be rested. Miss Dunmore, and near the bay, in 19 hours, in case the wall becomes inconvenient to somebody more important than me." He left. The younger one in the corridor flinched away from him as he passed, then hurried after, and the door cycled shut, and Cass Dunmore sat alone in the transit quarters with a boot and a brush and 92 hours on the clock. She picked up the brush. She started again to groom the empty air where he should have been, long even strokes, and then she stopped, because that was a thing for a person who did not think she was going to get her dog back, and she had just decided, whatever the clerk said about walls, that she was. 19 hours, Biscuit, she said to the empty room. Hang on. I'm coming to be worth it. 3 decks down, in a reinforced observation cell with pressure-rated glass, a very large old dog lay with his chin on his paws and his eyes half open, watching the door he had been watching for 92 hours, waiting, with the bottomless patience of a creature who had been promised, for the one small human whose voice meant that everything was, in the end, going to be fine. The overseer of the Osprey Reach did not summon Vray so much as intercept him. He was crossing the transit concourse, headed back toward his own office and the small grim comfort of a form he could at least stare at, when the concourse lights shifted to the pale amber. The station used to announce that someone important was moving through it, and a wedge of sarin security opened around a single figure in the deep green mantle of the overseer's office. Overseer Lun Casrith was old even by sarin reckoning, dry as a husk, and she had run the Reach for 30 years by the simple method of never once being surprised in public. She was, Vray could tell at a glance, about to be surprised in public, and she blamed him for it. "Officer Vray," she said, "the Draken Guild has filed a contract abandonment on my station during an integration audit. Their filing includes a sentence in the official record which reads the specimen cannot be handled by any means known to the Guild. Do you understand what that sentence is worth to the review panel?" "A great deal, Overseer." "It is worth the audit. It is worth 2 years of integration negotiation. The panel arrived predisposed to find the humans unfit for civilized traffic. Half the Conquered wanted them kept behind a quarantine line, and the panel is the compromise that lets that faction feel heard. And I have now handed them, in the official record, a signed professional statement that a human's household pet is beyond the handling capacity of the finest hazard crew in the sector." She did not raise her voice. Vray had never heard her raise her voice. "You hired the Guild." "I hired the certified contractor the register required, Overseer. The register classes the animal at 9. I know what the register says. Kell showed me the projection. Kell has been unbearable about the projection." Casrith's dry mouth thinned. "That is not the failure. The failure is that we now have a projection, a signed abandonment, an empty scale, and a review panel that convenes in Bay 4 in 18 hours to watch us either solve this or fail to. If we fail to, the humans are found unfit, the delegation is turned back, and the Reach, my Reach, becomes the station that could not process a dog. That is the phrase that will be used, Officer. I have already heard the panel's aquatic member use it. A station that could not process a dog." "Overseer," Vray said carefully, "the human handler can process the dog. She told me she could walk it onto the scale in 10 seconds. The human handler is uncertified personnel, prohibited within the containment perimeter of a Class 9 specimen. It is written into the biosecurity code that the panel is here to audit us against." Casrith's eyes were flat. "If I lower a Class 9 perimeter to let an uncertified human walk in and handle an apex predator by hand, and it goes wrong in front of the panel, if the animal so much as looks at a reviewer the way it looked at the Guild handler, I have not merely failed the audit. I have gotten a reviewer killed and proven every argument the quarantine faction ever made. I cannot risk it. And if you do nothing—" "If I do nothing," Casrith said, "the scale stays empty, and that is its own verdict." She turned to go, then stopped. "Find me another way, Vray. A certified way. There must be a certified way to put a mass on a form that does not require me to gamble a reviewer's life on a human girl's affection for a monster. You have 18 hours. Find it. She swept off in her wedge of amber light, and Vray stood in the concourse and understood, with the clarity of a man watching a manifest fail to balance, that there was not another way, and that everyone above him knew there was not another way, and that his entire purpose for the next 18 hours would be to prove the absence of the thing they had ordered him to find, so that when the wall finally came down it would come down as a last resort and not a choice. "Pole," he said. Pole materialized from behind a pillar. "Officer." "We are going to try everything," Vray said. "Everything certified, everything the code allows. We are going to try each certified method, and we are going to document each certified method failing in order with timestamps, so that when the overseer is finally forced to do the only thing that will work, the record shows she had no alternative. Do you understand? We're going to fail on purpose. We are going to fail honestly and document it thoroughly, which for a clerk is the same as a plan." Vray started walking. "Bring me the remote manipulation rig, and find out who handles the station's Korath." The remote manipulation rig was the code's preferred method for hazardous transfers, and it failed in a way Vray found almost restful. It was a good machine, a gantry of articulated arms on a track, operated from a shielded booth, designed to guide, lift, or coax a specimen without a living handler entering the perimeter. Biosecurity used it for venomous fauna and for anything that could not be sedated. 2 technicians ran it, and they were competent, and Vray stood in the booth and watched the primary arm extend across Bay 4 toward the sled, a broad padded manipulator descending on smooth hydraulics toward the sleeping dog, and he watched the dog wake. Biscuit did not startle. He lifted his head, considered the descending arm with the mild interest of a creature evaluating whether the ceiling was falling, and then he did the thing that Vray would later describe to the panel as the most alarming non-event of his career. He stood up. He walked, unhurried, 4 steps to the side, out from under the arm. And he sat back down and looked at the booth, directly at the booth, at the shielded glass, at the 2 technicians and Vray behind it, with an expression of patient, bottomless tolerance, and he yawned. "He moved out of the way," said the senior technician. "Yes." He watched the arm come down and he just stepped aside, politely, like you'd step aside for a cleaning cart. The technician's hands had come off the controls. "Officer, I can chase him around the bay with the rig. I can probably get an arm on him if I corner him, but he'll know I'm doing it. He's watching me do it. He worked out what the arm was for in about a second and a half, and he made a decision about it, and the decision was to be gracious, and I do not want to be in the booth when he makes a different decision. I'm sorry. I've run this rig for 9 years. I'm not putting an arm on something that's being polite to me." "Document it," Vray told Pole. "Remote manipulation, specimen evaded without distress, operator declined to continue, timestamp." The physician adjunct came next, because the code's second method was chemical, and she lasted even less time than the rig. She was a small, precise medical officer named Emil, of a feathered inland species, and she had a sedation lance and a dosage chart, and the specific brittle confidence of a professional who has decided to be brave. She stood at the edge of the perimeter and did the arithmetic aloud, because the arithmetic was the problem, and the arithmetic went like this. The safe sedation dose for a specimen scaled to mass and metabolism, and Biscuit's mass was, well, that was the entire problem, wasn't it? They did not have his mass. That was the whole reason for the exercise, and so she had to estimate. And if she underestimated the dose, the specimen would go groggy and frightened and unpredictable at close range. And if she overestimated it, she would stop the heart of a Class 9 apex predator inside the overseer's containment during an integration audit. And either way, the first thing that would happen was that she would have to walk within lance range of the animal to deliver it. I can dart it from here, she said. The lance has range. Then dart it, said Vray. Emil raised the lance. Down on the sled, Biscuit watched her raise it. He did not move. But something in the room changed. Vray felt it, a pressure with no source, the specific silence of a large, calm thing giving a small, nervous thing its complete attention, and physician adjunct Emil, who had decided to be brave, discovered the limit of the decision. Her arm came down. She set the lance on the floor with great care, as though it had become fragile. I took an oath, she said to no one in a strange, flat voice. I took an oath to do no harm. I have just understood that the oath was always aspirational, and that this is the first time in my life it has been tested, and I find that I will not put a needle in that animal, because it is looking at me, and I do not think it would mind the needle, and I cannot explain why that is worse, but it is much, much worse. She picked the lance back up, turned it around, and offered it to Vray handle first. Log that the chemical method was declined by the attending physician on grounds of, she stopped. On grounds of conscience, log conscience, it is the only true word I have. Chemical method, Vray said to Pole, declined on grounds of conscience, timestamp. Pole logged it. Pole had, Vray noticed, stopped whistling. There is a point past which a clerk simply accepts the shape of the day. That is 2 certified methods, Vray said. There is one more the code allows before I am out of certified methods, the trained apex method. We bring a handler trained apex of the station's own, an animal accustomed to containment work, a known quantity, and we let it into the perimeter first to settle the specimen, to establish that the space is controlled. It is used for social predators. It sometimes works where machines do not, because an animal reads an animal. He did not sound as though he believed it. The station keeps a Korath for security. It is the most disciplined apex on the reach. Fetch its handler. The Korath's handler was a broad, quiet Sarin named Postle who had worked with the same animal for 11 years, and loved it the way a man loves the one thing that has never lied to him. The Korath itself was magnificent and awful, 6-legged, plated in interlocking slate scoots, low and long and heavy, with a wide flat head and a lot of very frank teeth, and it walked at Postle's side on no leash at all because it needed none, because it was the most controlled predator on the station, and everyone knew it and it knew it too. Vray had seen it clear a concourse of a panicked crowd by simply appearing. It was Class 6 on the register. It was, until 4 days ago, the most dangerous animal on the Osprey reach, and it carried itself accordingly. Postle brought it to the hatch of Bay 4 and it walked in beside him, easy and enormous, and then, 11 meters from the sled, it stopped. "Come on," Postle said in the low croon he used with it. "Come on, girl, just a look, just a settle." The Korath did not come on. It had planted all 6 feet. Its head was low, level, fixed on the sled, on the tawny mountain that lay upon the sled watching it back, and its plates had risen along its spine. Not in aggression, Postle knew the difference. Postle had 11 years of knowing the difference. But in the ancient full-body attention of a predator that has just been informed by every instinct it owns, that it is not the largest thing in the room. Its wide flat head lowered another degree. And then, slowly, deliberately, with the terrible dignity of a proud animal doing a thing it has decided it must do, the Korath lay down. It lay down on the deck of Bay 4, 11 meters from a sleeping dog, and it put its plated chin between its forelegs, and it kept its eyes on the sled, and it did not move, and it would not move, and Postle stood over it with the leash he never used hanging useless in his hand and his face gone the color of ash. "She's yielding," Postle said. His voice had gone very small. "I have never seen her yield to anything. She doesn't yield to me, we're partners, she yields to nobody, that's the whole she's yielding. She's telling it she's not a threat. She's asking it to let her stay in the room." He looked at the dog on the sled. The dog looked back at the Korath with a soft, incurious warmth, and then Vray watched it happen, and would swear to the panel it happened. The dog gave a single slow wag of its heavy tail. Once, the way one might nod to a stranger who had shown good manners, and laid its head back down. The Koreth let out a long breath and went absolutely still, its dignity intact, its rank established, the second largest thing in the room. "Get her out," Postle whispered, "please. Get her out, she'll stay down as long as it wants her down. Get her out." He coaxed the Koreth backward on its belly, and it went backward on its belly the whole 11 meters and never once took its eyes off the sled. And only at the hatch did it consent to stand, and then it pressed against Postle's leg like a much smaller animal and let him lead it out. Vray watched the hatch cycle shut. "The trained apex method," he said. "Log it, Pole." "How do I?" Pole's stylus hovered. "How do I log that, officer? What do I write?" Vray considered the empty scale, and the green 0 patient above it, and the sleeping dog, and the 17 now hours on the clock, and the review panel that was going to walk into this bay and find every certified method in the code exhausted and documented and useless. "Write that the station's own apex," he said, "recognize the specimen as its senior and decline to compete. Write that we are out of certified methods." He turned toward the hatch, toward the long walk back to the overseer's office and the conversation he had just earned the right to have. "And note the time. The overseer is going to want to know exactly how long it took us to run out of good ideas before she is forced to use the only bad one that works." There was one more idea, and it was Pole's, and Vray let him chase it for an hour because a clerk should be allowed to chase an idea, and because it very nearly worked, which made its failure the most instructive of all. "We do not need the animal to stand on the scale," Pole said, in the small hours with the particular brightness of a junior who has found a loophole. "We need its mass. The mass can be obtained indirectly. The containment sled has a rated load-bearing frame. Its own drives measure the load they carry for balance. We query the sled. It tells us what it is carrying. We subtract the sled's own mass, which is on file, and the difference is the animal. The animal never moves. No one enters the perimeter. We fill the field." It was, Vray granted, genuinely clever. He authorized it. They queried the sled. The sled reported that it was carrying a load, and the load figure was there, clean and real. And for the length of one bright, hopeful minute, the empty field seemed about to fill itself by pure arithmetic, and no one had to be brave at all. Then the engineering officer they had woken to certify the figure read the query log and shook her head. "The frame gives gross load," she said. "Animal plus bedding plus the water bowl plus the feed tray plus whatever it is lying on. For a manifest mass you need the specimen alone, tared clean to standard. To tear it, I have to know the mass of everything in the cradle that is not the animal, which means removing everything from the cradle that is not the animal, which means either taking the bedding and the bowls out from under a Class 9 apex." She looked at the sled, at the sleeping mountain on it, or taking the apex off the bedding. "Either way, officer, somebody has to reach into that cradle. The arithmetic does not save you. It only moves the moment you have to reach in, and then it hands the moment back to you with the numbers rounded off, which the code will not accept for a hazard manifest. It has to be a clean tared weight on a certified plate. There is no honest way around the plate. There is only the plate and the animal, and whoever can convince the animal to stand on it." Vray looked at the clean sled load figure. So nearly a number, so nearly the end of all of this. And then he looked at the scale 12 meters away with its patient green 0, and he understood that the universe had built the code precisely to defeat the clever, and that there was no arithmetic and no apparatus and no loophole between him and the plain fact of the animal, and that everything he tried from here would only be a longer road back to the same plate and the same problem. 100 kilos of forgiveness that no one on the station was willing to ask to move. "Document it," he told Pole, and he was gentle about it because the boy had earned gentleness. "Indirect weighing by sled frame query. Gross load obtained. Clean tear not achievable without perimeter entry. Rejected by engineering under hazard manifest standard." It was a good idea, Pole. It was the best idea anyone has had in 2 days. It failed for the same reason all the others failed. Because in the end, there is no method that does not require someone to walk up to the animal and treat it like an animal, and every method we own is built to avoid exactly that. We have spent 2 days and a fortune proving that our entire toolkit is designed to keep us from ever having to trust a thing, and that the one problem it cannot solve is a thing that can only be trusted. He rubbed the ridge of bone above his eyes, a Saren's gesture of deep tiredness. Timestamp it and add it to the sequence, and then go and rest. We have run out of clever. Soon we will be reduced to the truth, and the truth is 3 decks up in a stained set of coveralls, and I am going to have to convince the overseer to let her walk into a room. Pole timestamped it. Pole did not go and rest, no one rested, those last hours, but he stopped looking for loopholes, and that, Vray thought, was its own small growing up. The moment a clerk stops believing the form can be tricked and starts believing it can only be told the truth. It was the same lesson the guild had learned, and the physician, and the Korath's handler, and the review panel would learn it last of all, in a bright bay, from a girl who had known it since she was 13. That force has an edge, and cleverness has an edge, and past both edges there is only the plain fact of a living thing and whether or not it trusts you, and no station in the Conquered had ever been built to measure that, though every station in the Conquered was about to learn it would have to. The review panel had been given the Reach's finest conference chamber, and they had ruined it inside a day. They had ruined it by being 3 people who agreed on nothing except that they did not wish to be there, and the chamber, which had been designed to make disagreement feel dignified, was not equal to them. Vray was summoned into it 17 hours before the departure of the steady hand, to give an account of the transfer's status, and he stood at the narrow end of a long table and made his account to the 3 of them, and he watched the panel do to the problem of Biscuit exactly what the panel had been doing to the problem of humanity for a year. At the head of the table sat Envoy Suth of the Veiler, the panel's chair, a lean amphibious diplomat with skin like wet river stone and the exhausted neutrality of a professional referee. To her left sat Reviewer Andrek, a broad-plated Drawk, the same people as the guild, Vray noted, and not, he suspected, coincidentally, who had come to the panel from the Quarantine faction and who wore that fact openly. To Suth's right sat the 3rd reviewer, an ancient cephalopod scholar named Vesalan in a mobility harness, who had said, according to Pole's gossip, exactly 4 words in 2 days, and had spent the rest of the time watching. So, said Reviewer Andrek, before Vray had finished his account, let us be clear on what the officer is telling us. The human delegation brought aboard this station an apex predator classed at 9. The finest hazard guild in the sector, my own people, I will say it plainly, attempted to handle it and abandoned the contract in terror. The station's certified methods have, one after another, failed. The station's own security apex lay down before it, and the delegation's proposed solution is that we permit an untrained human girl to walk into the containment and handle the creature by hand. He spread his plates. I have been arguing for a year that humans do not grasp the concept of containment. I could not have built a better demonstration if I had been given the budget. Reviewer Andrek, said Envoy Suth without heat, let the officer finish. There is little to finish, Andrek said. The facts finish themselves. This is what I mean about them, Envoy. It is not malice. I do not think the humans are malicious. I think they are reckless in a way that is worse than malice, because malice at least respects the danger it courts. The humans do not respect it. They looked at a Class 9 apex and they named it. What was the name, officer? Biscuit, Vray said. Biscuit, Andrek repeated, and let the word sit in the dignified chamber. They named it Biscuit and they let it sleep on their furniture, and they cannot understand why the rest of the galaxy does not wish to share a transit lane with it. That is not a people ready for the Conquered. That is a people who have been lucky, for a very long time, on a world that should have killed them, and who have mistaken their luck for a relationship. He turned to Suth. My recommendation stands, and it grows stronger by the hour. The delegation is turned back. The animal is not permitted onward passage under any classification, and the human integration is deferred pending a full review of what other creatures they consider pets. That is one recommendation, said Envoy Suth. It is on the record, Officer Vray. Is there a certified method remaining? No, Envoy, Vray said. The code's methods are exhausted and documented. There is one uncertified method. The human handler states she can walk the specimen onto the scale by hand. She has offered to do so. And you believe her, said Andrek. Vray was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he made a small decision, the kind of decision a clerk of 40 years is entitled to make once or twice in a career. I believe, Vray said, that I have watched 4 professionals in one machine and 1 apex predator refuse to touch that animal in 17 hours, and that in all of that time the animal has done nothing but sleep, step politely out of the way, and nod to the Korath. I believe that Assessor Kell, who classified it at 9 and stands behind the classification, has told me privately that the specimen is the gentlest creature he has ever assessed, and that this is exactly what frightens him. And I believe that there is a human 3 decks away who has not seen her animal in 4 days, who talks about it stealing socks, and who described the situation to me in a single sentence that I have not been able to put down since. He paused. She said, "He's not calm because he's harmless. He's calm because he's got nothing to prove. And I have processed manifests for 40 years. Reviewer Andrek and I have met perhaps 4 people in that time of whom the same could truly be said, and every one of them was more trustworthy than the frightened, than the certified, than the one standing behind good walls. So yes, I believe her, for whatever a clerk's belief is worth." The chamber was silent. "It is worth noting," said Envoy Suth, "and it is noted." She made a mark. "The panel will observe the log being taken in Bay 4 in," she checked, 16 hours. "If a lawful method is found to place a mass on the manifest, the panel will weigh it as evidence of the delegation's fitness. If no method is found, that too is evidence. Officer, you are dismissed. Overseer Kasrith remains responsible for the method chosen." Vray bowed and turned to go, and as he reached the door the ancient cephalopod in the mobility harness spoke, for the first time in Vray's presence, in a voice like water moving under ice. "Officer," said Vesalan, "one question." "Scholar." The Korath lay down, the old scholar's eyes, enormous and dark and unhurried, fixed on him. "You said it lay down and offered its throat and asked to remain in the room. You said the dog nodded to it." "Yes, scholar." "In 60 years of xenobiology," said Vesalan, "I have learned that instruments lie, that panels lie, that certifications lie, and that frightened professionals lie most of all, because their fear speaks before they do. But an apex predator does not lie about rank. It cannot. Its body is honest in a way that no signatory to a treaty has ever managed." The old creature settled deeper into the harness. "The Korath told you the truth about the dog. I would very much like to see the truth again in 16 hours with my own eyes. That is not a vote. It is the reason I came all this way. Thank you, officer. You may go." 3 decks down, Cass Dunmore stood with her forehead against pressure-rated glass and watched her dog watch the door. She had talked her way to the observation deck of the quarantine block. Not into it. They would not give her that, but to the outer gallery, where a long window looked down into the reinforced cell, and where an apologetic junior had let her stand on the condition that she not knock on the glass, not call out, not do anything that might excite the specimen. Cass had agreed, and had not knocked, and had not called out, and had stood with her hands flat and her forehead against the cold glass for 2 hours while the specimen lay below her, and did not know she was there. He looked older through the glass. That was the thing that got her. Under the flat quarantine lights his muzzle looked grayer than she remembered, and his hips looked worse, and he was doing the thing he did when he was worried and trying not to show it, which was to lie very still with his chin on his paws and his eyes on the door, breathing slow, waiting, being good. He had been being good for 4 days. He had been being good in a box, for strangers, because being good was the thing she had taught him and the thing he had left when she was not there to remind him. And the sight of it, the enormous patient goodness of him, worn thin and gray under the lights, put a pressure behind Cass's eyes that she did not let become anything, because the junior was watching and she was, whatever they thought of her, a professional. "I'm here," she said, too quiet for the glass to carry. "I know you can't hear me. I'm here anyway." Below, the dog's ears shifted, not toward the door, toward the glass, toward the ceiling, toward some register of the air that no instrument on the station could read, and his heavy head came up off his paws, and he turned it slowly and looked up through 2 centimeters of pressure-rated glass, straight at the small human pressed against the gallery window, and his whole body changed. His ears came forward. His tail, that great heavy rope of a tail, thumped once against the deck, and then again, and then it was going, slow and huge and helpless, and he heaved himself up onto his bad hips with a grunt she could see but not hear, and he stood under the window with his whole face open and his tail swinging and looked up at her the way he had looked up at her since he was 8 weeks old. And Cass Dunmore stood very still with her hands flat on the glass, and did not knock and did not call out and did not, whatever it cost her, let the junior see her face. "There you are," she whispered. "There you are." Behind her, the apologetic junior made a small sound. Cass turned. The junior was staring down into the cell, at the Class 9 apex predator standing under the window, wagging its entire back half like a delighted puppy, and the junior's translator gave a soft, stunned little cadence. "It's happy," the junior said. "It saw you and it's," the projection said. "I read the projection. It's supposed to be," the junior stopped. "It just wanted its person, 4 days. It just wanted its person the whole time." "Yeah," Cass said. Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. "That's the part your machine can't measure. That's the part I keep trying to tell them." She put her hand flat on the glass, and below, the dog lifted his great head toward it, toward the small pale shape of her palm 2 centimeters and a lifetime away, and held it there, and the 2 of them stood like that, the girl and the monster, on either side of the glass the conquered had put between them. 16 hours, Cass said. "They're going to make me wait 16 more hours and do it in front of an audience that wants us to fail." She huffed something that was almost a laugh. "You know what the funny thing is, buddy? They're all scared of the wrong thing. They spent a fortune being scared of you, and the thing they should have been scared of this whole time is how much I love you and how sure I am. That's the dangerous number. Not your jaw." She tapped the glass once gently and the dog's tail went again. 16 hours, then we're going home." She stayed until the junior's shift changed, and a less sympathetic officer made her leave. She went back to the transit quarters and lay down in her coveralls on the cot and did not sleep. And 3 decks below, the old dog lay back down under the window where his person had been, facing up now instead of at the door, and waited with his chin on his paws for the ceiling to give her back. Reviewer Andrek did not trust a thing he had not seen fail with his own eyes, and so, 11 hours before the demonstration, he went down to the quarantine block to watch the animal fail to be dangerous, which he was certain it would do, because he understood the difference between a real predator and a lucky one, and he intended to put that difference in the record. He was Drock. His people were the ones the galaxy hired to move what killed, and Andrek had done the work himself before politics claimed him. He had ridden the cradles, he had held the poles, he knew in his plates the honest weight of a dangerous animal and the specific way it filled a room. The guild's abandonment shamed him. Sethrek's owl was a cousin of his clan line, and the sentence in the filing, "The specimen cannot be handled by any means known to the guild," was, to Andrek, not a warning but a slander on his people's competence, and he had come down to the block to prove that what the guild had fled was not an animal beyond handling, but merely an animal handled wrong. He brought no gear. He brought nothing but himself, 300 kilos of plated drac who had wrestled a mallback into a cradle with his bare hands as a younger male, and he stood at the observation window of the quarantine cell and looked down at the thing his cousin's guild had run from. It was asleep. It was large. He granted that, larger than the projections had made him picture, a genuine mass of an animal. But it was old. He could see the gray in its muzzle and the way it favored its hindquarters even lying down, and it was asleep. And Andrek had put younger and meaner things than this into cradles before his plates had finished hardening. "Open the cell," he told the block officer. "I will assess it directly, for the record." "Reviewer, the code prohibits." "I am the code this cycle," said Andrek. "I am the panel. Open the cell. I will not touch it. I will stand inside the perimeter at range, and I will observe its threat effect directly, so that when I sign my recommendation I sign it as a witness and not as a reader of frightened men's reports." "Open the cell." They opened the cell. Andrek went down the short ramp into the quarantine floor and stood just inside the door, 6 meters from the sleeping animal, and folded his arms, and waited for it to wake and show him what it was. He was not afraid. He had made a professional life of not being afraid, and he had stood inside the range of genuine apexes and read them the way a sailor reads weather. And he intended to read this one and find it wanting, a strong animal, yes, but only an animal, and the terror around it a contagion of soft species and softer instruments. The dog woke. It did the thing the reports described, which Andrek had discounted as the embroidery of frightened men. It did not startle. It lifted its heavy head off its paws and it looked at him. Not at the door, not at the room, at him, at Andrek, with 2 dark eyes that found his and settled into them. And Andrek, who had come to read the animal, discovered that the animal was reading him. He had never been read before. That was the thing his plates understood before his mind did. Every apex he had ever handled had regarded him as an obstacle, a threat, prey or noise, categories, all of them, the flat categories of a creature that sorts the world into eat and flee and fight. This animal did none of that. This animal looked at him, and Andrek felt himself being weighed, not as prey, not as a threat, but as a fact, a large, loud fact that had entered the room, and he felt the animal arrive at a judgment about the fact, and the judgment was that the fact was not important. The dog looked at 300 kilos of plated drac, at a male who had cradled mallbacks barehanded, and it decided in the space of a breath that he was not worth standing up for. And then it did the worst thing. It was patient with him. It held his eyes for a moment longer, long enough for Andrek to understand, in the deepest and most honest part of himself, the part below politics and clan shame and the whole architecture of his certainty, that the distance between them was 6 meters, and that 6 meters was nothing, was a courtesy, was a thing the animal was choosing to leave in place, and could stop choosing at any moment for no reason and with no warning. And then, having established this, having made Andrek know it in his plates, the dog forgave him for being in the room. It yawned. It laid its great gray head back down on its paws, and it closed its eyes, and it dismissed him as thoroughly as a magistrate dismissing a case, and went back to sleep. Reviewer Andrek stood inside the perimeter for a long moment and did not move, because he was not entirely certain his legs would obey him. And then he turned, with as much dignity as he could gather, and walked back up the ramp and out of the cell, and did not speak until the door had cycled shut behind him. "Close it," he said. His voice was not quite his own. "Close it. Log that the reviewer inspected the specimen directly and observed." He stopped. He was Drac. His people did not lie about danger. It was the one honesty their whole culture was built on. Log that the reviewer observed the specimen decline to regard him as a threat, and that this was the most dangerous thing the reviewer has witnessed in 30 years of hazard work, and that the reviewer withdraws no recommendation but wishes the record to show that he now understands his cousin's guild, and is ashamed of the sentence he wrote about them. He walked back toward the conference chamber alone, and he did not go straight there. He stopped for a while, at a viewing gallery that looked out on the daylit curve of the world below the reach, and he stood with his plated hands on the rail, and thought about the difference between an animal that is dangerous and an animal that is dangerous, and has decided, so far, not to be, and about which of those a person could ever truly hold a contract over. And he understood that his year of arguing that humans did not respect containment had been, from the start, an argument about the wrong thing. The humans respected containment fine. They simply had, sleeping on their furniture, a reason not to need it, and the reason was worse than any wall, because you could not certify it, could not audit it, could not lower it for 16 hours and raise it again. You could only trust it or not. He did not change his recommendation. He was too proud for that and too honest to pretend the animal was safe. But when he returned to the chamber, Envoy Suth asked him how the direct inspection had gone, and Reviewer Andrek of the Quarantine faction, who had come to the Reach to keep humanity behind a line, said only, "I will reserve my recommendation until after the demonstration. I find I want to see the girl." Vray heard about the reviewer's inspection within the hour, because a clerk hears everything, and he took it to the overseer as the last piece of the argument he had been building for a day and a half. Andrek went in himself, he told her in the green quiet of her office, unarmed, to prove it was handleable. He came out and reserved his recommendation and asked to see the girl. Overseer, the strongest voice for turning the humans back, has just, on the record, declined to say the animal is unsafe after standing 6 meters from it. That is not nothing. That is the wall the machine built, cracking, in the one place we most needed it to crack. "It is not authorization," said Kasrath. "No, but it is cover." Vray set his pad on her desk, and on it was the whole documented sequence, the guild's abandonment, the rig, the physician, the Korath, every certified method exhausted and time-stamped in order. "Overseer, here is the record, every lawful method attempted and failed in sequence documented. When the panel convenes in Bay 4, they will read this record, and the record will show that the station did everything the code permits, and that the code was not equal to the animal. At that point there are 2 remaining options, and the record makes them the only 2. Option 1. The mass is never logged, the transport is held indefinitely, the delegation is turned back, and the Reach becomes the station that could not process a dog. Option 2. You exercise the overseer's discretionary authority, which exists. I have read the code. It exists precisely for the circumstance where the code's own methods have failed, to permit the specimen's registered handler to conduct the transfer under direct supervision, as a last resort on the record, with the panel watching. He straightened. You do not have to gamble a reviewer's life on the girl's affection, overseer. You have to gamble a form. That is all that is on the scale, a number in a field, and the record will show you had no other way to get it. Overseer Kasrath looked at the pad for a long time. You have been building this since yesterday, she said. The whole documented sequence. You made them fail in order so I would be forced into the one thing that works, and so that when I am forced, the record protects me. I am a clerk, overseer, Vray said. I fill fields. I have simply arranged the fields so that the true answer is the only one left in them. It is the most useful thing a clerk can do. Kasrath almost smiled. It was a dry, tired thing, but it was almost a smile. 16 years I have wanted an officer who understood that the record is a weapon, she said, and I get you 11 hours before the worst audit of my career. She pushed the pad back across the desk. Do it. Draft the discretionary order. Last resort, direct supervision, panel witnessing, every certified method documented as exhausted first. I will sign it 1 hour before the demonstration, not a moment sooner, so that no one can say I chose it before I was forced to it. She fixed him with her flat old eyes. And Vray, if the girl is wrong about that animal, if it is only that no one has yet given it a reason, it will happen in front of the panel, and it will be my signature on the order, and the humans will be turned back for a generation, and you and I will both spend the rest of our careers counting containers on a border station. You understand the size of what you are asking me to sign?" "I understand it, Overseer." "Then tell me, clerk to clerk, why you are so sure." Vray thought about the girl brushing the air where the dog should be. He thought about the Koreth lying down. He thought about a sentence he had not been able to put down. "Because I have processed the frightened for 40 years, he said, "and the girl is not frightened, and neither is the dog. And in my experience, Overseer, the two creatures in any room who are not frightened are almost always the two who understand the situation best. I would rather stake a form on them than on a machine that has to apologize for its own numbers." He picked up the pad. "I will draft the order, 1 hour before, last resort, on the record." He drafted the order, and 3 decks up in the transit quarters, Cass Dunmore lay awake on a cot in her coveralls and counted down the hours to the moment she would finally be allowed to walk into a room and be worth the last 5 days of a good dog's patience. The human delegation kept its animals 3 decks below the transit quarters, in a leased hold the Corps had fitted out as a kennel, and Cass went down there the night before the demonstration because she could not sleep, and because the kennel was the only place on the Osprey Reach that smelled like home. It smelled like straw and warm fur, and the particular clean dog smell that no station scrubber had ever managed to file under any hazard category. And the moment the hatch cycled open, Cass felt some knot in her chest loosen for the first time in 5 days. The hold was dim and quiet night cycle, and down the row of runs she could hear the small sounds of sleeping animals, a paw against a wall, a low contented rumble, the rustle of something turning over in straw. This was the part of the integration the Concord had not yet seen, and the part, Cass thought, that would have finished the review panel entirely if they had. "Couldn't sleep either," said a voice. Liaison Officer Sarada Vane was sitting on an overturned feed crate at the end of the row, a mug of something steaming in her hands, and she did not look up as Cass came down the aisle. Vane was 50-odd, gray at the temples, a career Corps officer who had spent 20 years convincing aliens that Earth's animals were assets and not weapons, and she had the specific tiredness of a woman who had been losing that argument all week. "No," Cass said. She sat down on the straw across from the crate. "They're making me do it in front of the panel tomorrow, in the Bright Bay. The whole review board's going to be watching." "I know," Vane said. "I fought it. I wanted them to let you weigh him quietly days ago, no audience. They wouldn't. The panel wants the demonstration and the overseer wants the cover and everybody wants somebody else to be responsible if it goes wrong." She sipped her mug. "How's Biscuit?" "Old," Cass said. "Tired, been good in a box for 5 days for a bunch of strangers. He saw me through the observation glass this afternoon and wagged his whole back end like a puppy, and I had to stand there and not knock on the glass while he did it." Her voice did something and she made it stop. "He's fine. He's better than fine. That's the whole problem, isn't it? If he'd growl at somebody just once, they'd know how to think about him. It's the not growling that's breaking their brains." "It always is," Vane said. They sat in the dim kennel a while. Down the row, something large shifted in its straw and settled again. "You know what's in these runs," Vane said finally. It was not quite a question. "You've seen the manifest. You know what's sleeping down here." "I know." "The panel doesn't. The panel thinks Biscuit's the demonstration. The panel thinks they're being asked to certify whether humanity can be trusted with one retired Mastiff." Vane huffed something that was not a laugh. "There are 11 animals in this hold, Cass. Biscuit's the oldest and the slowest and the gentlest and the least of them, and he's the one that unmade a hazard guild. 2 runs down from here, there's a working shepherd named Tess who does search and recovery in vacuum, who has pulled 9 people out of decompression events, who is faster asleep than that guild crew was awake. There's a pair of Malinois the Corps won't even class as auxiliary because they're operational. There's a herding dog that runs a flock of 600 food animals across open range on a colony world with no fence and no drone, alone, and brings them home to the head every night, because somebody taught her the shape of the job once, and she decided it was hers. Vane turned her mug in her hands. And the panel is upstairs right now deciding whether we're civilized, based on the tired old boy in the box. And if they knew what was 2 runs down from him, they'd turn us back so fast the air would whistle. So we don't tell them, Cass said. So we don't tell them, Vane agreed. We let them meet Biscuit. We let them decide humanity's the kind of people who raise a monster and teach it to sleep in a lap. And we let them integrate us thinking they've seen the top of it when they've seen the bottom, because if they ever understood what we actually are, a species that took every apex its death world could grow, and turned the whole lot into partners and friends and working animals and someone to sleep next to when the storms came, they'd never stop being afraid of us. She finally looked up, and her tired eyes found Cass's in the dim. That's the mission, kid. That's the whole diplomatic mission, and it's why it has to be Biscuit and it has to be you. Not because he's the most impressive, because he's the least. Because a species that's dangerous is a threat, but a species that's dangerous and gentle is a mystery, and you can't turn a mystery back at the border. You have to let it in to understand it. Biscuit's not our strongest card. He's our safest one, and safe is what gets us through the door. The rest of them, she nodded down the row, the rest of them are what we do once we're inside, and it is all, every bit of it, going to be help. Search dogs, herd dogs, companions for the ones who came out of the death world too scarred to sleep alone. We're not bringing weapons, Cass. We never were. We're bringing the thing that got us through our own nightmare to share it. But you can't lead with that. Nobody believes the gift. Everybody believes the threat. So you lead with an old dog who wants a nap, and you let them work the rest out slowly, once they've already decided to love him. Cass was quiet for a long moment. Down the row, the working shepherd Tess lifted her head at the sound of the voices, considered them, found them unthreatening, and went back to sleep with a sigh that carried the length of the hold. He's going to do it right, Cass said. Tomorrow, he always does it right. He's never once let me down in front of anybody, even when I've deserved it. She pulled a piece of straw apart in her fingers. I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about them. I'm worried one of those reviewers is going to do something stupid at the wrong moment, spook something, and then it's not Biscuit's fault, but it's Biscuit's file forever, and it's all of us turned back because some frightened official couldn't hold still for 2 minutes. She looked up. That's the part that scares me. Not my dog. Never my dog. The people. The people are always the dangerous part. The people are always the dangerous part, Vane said. You could put that on the core crest. She stood and stretched and set her empty mug on the crate. Get some sleep, kid, or don't. I never can the night before something that matters, but do me one thing. Tomorrow when you walk in there and the whole panel's watching and the overseer's sweating her career and Andrek's looking for his reason to say no. She paused at the hatch. Don't perform. Don't try to convince them. Don't make it a demonstration. Just go get your dog and weigh him and take him home, the way you would if nobody was watching at all. That's the only thing that'll work. The second it looks like a show, they'll smell the fear in it and it'll all come apart. The magic isn't that he's dangerous and calm. The magic is that to you it's just Tuesday. Let them see Tuesday. Tuesday's what wins. She left. Cass stayed a while longer in the warm, dim hold that smelled like home, among the sleeping animals that a starfaring civilization was not yet ready to understand. And down the row, the old working shepherd dreamed of vacuum and the people she had pulled out of it. And the herding dog dreamed of 600 food animals coming home to the head in the evening light. And none of them knew or would ever care that 3 decks up a review panel was deciding the future of the species that had raised them. And that the deciding would come down, in the end, to whether one tired girl could make the extraordinary look like an ordinary Tuesday. Cass thought she could. She had been making it look like Tuesday since she was 13 years old, and a scared kid on a hard world had been handed an 8-week-old puppy that would one day weigh more than she did. Tuesday was the whole of what she knew. She went back up to the transit quarters and lay down in her coveralls, and sometime before the bay cycle brightened, she slept. They moved the sled into Bay 4 2 hours before the demonstration, and it was the single most elaborate operation Vray had ever supervised for the purpose of relocating a sleeping animal that could have walked the distance itself. Because no one would touch it, the sled went by remote, the whole containment cradle rolling on its own drives down the transit spine from the quarantine block to the weighing bay, escorted by a hollow square of security who kept a careful 10 meters from it the entire way and looked, Vray thought, less like guards than like mourners. The dog rode the moving sled placidly, sitting up now, watching the corridors go by with the mild traveler's interest of a creature that had ridden many strange conveyances in its life, and found this one no stranger than the rest. At one junction, it saw its reflection in a polished bulkhead and studied it for a moment and then lost interest. At another, it lay down. It arrived in Bay 4 calm, rested, and Vray noted the detail because details were his trade, pointed toward the hatch, toward the direction the human's quarters lay, as though it had worked out where in the station its person was, and preferred to face that way. The bay had been arranged for witnesses. A viewing gallery ran along one wall, glassed and raised, and by the demonstration hour it held the review panel in a row of 3. The overseer and her staff, Assessor Kell with his 11 pages, Postle, and at the very back, as far from the glass as the gallery allowed, the Korath, who had refused to be kennelled and whom Postle had not the heart to force, and who lay now with its plated chin on its forelegs watching the sled below with the fixed, respectful attention it had not surrendered since the day before. The bay itself was bright. It was always bright. The whole weighing complex sat under a dome of daylight panels that mimicked the primary's noon, a deliberate design, because the code held that hazardous specimens were calmer in daylight, and the daylight poured down now across the polished deck and the clean scale and the tawny mountain of the dog on its sled, and lit the whole strange theater like a stage. Vray stood at the perimeter line with the discretionary order on his pad and the overseer's signature, 1 hour fresh upon it, and waited for the humans. Cass Dunmore came in through the personnel hatch wearing her coveralls, with the coffee stain on the cuff. That was the first thing the panel saw of humanity's solution to a Class 9 apex, and Vray watched them see it. A small, plain young woman in stained work clothes, no armor, no gear, nothing in her hands, walking into the bright bay with the slightly stiff care of someone who had not slept and was pretending she had. She stopped at the perimeter line beside Vray and looked across the 12 meters of bright deck at the sled, and at the animal on it. And the animal, Vray saw it happen, and up in the gallery he heard Kell make a small sound. The animal came to its feet. It came to its feet all at once, the whole gray-muzzled mass of it, and its ears went forward, and its great tail began to swing, and it made a sound that carried across the whole bright bay and up into the glassed gallery, a low broken rumble that was not a growl. That was the furthest thing in the galaxy from a growl. That was a 9-year-old dog who had been alone in a box for 5 days making, at the sight of the one person who was entirely his, a noise of pure, uncomplicated joy. "That's my boy," Cass said quietly, not to the panel, not to Vray, to the dog. "That's my boy, 2 minutes, hang on." "Miss Dunmore," Vray said, "before I read the order into the record, I must say the required words, and the panel must hear you answer them. Do you understand that the specimen is classed at 9, that the station's certified methods have been exhausted, and that you are entering the containment perimeter of an apex predator as uncertified personnel, of your own free will, at your own risk, under the overseer's discretionary authority, as a last resort?" "I understand that you're describing my dog," Cass said. "But yeah, I understand. Free will, my own risk. Read your order." Vray read the order into the record. He read it slowly and completely, every certified method and its documented failure, the rig and the physician and the Korath, the guild's abandonment, the whole sequence he had built into an argument. And as he read it, the bay was silent except for the low, happy rumble of the dog and the swing of its heavy tail against the sled. And up in the gallery, the ancient scholar Vesalin leaned forward in the mobility harness with its enormous dark eyes fixed on the deck below. And reviewer Andrek sat very still with his plated hands flat on the rail, and Envoy Suth watched the girl. And the perimeter is lowered, Vray finished, for the duration of the transfer only at the timestamp now logged. Miss Dunmore, the scale is 12 meters ahead of you. The mass must register and hold for the length of one full breath for the instrument to record it. When it has recorded, you will walk the specimen off the scale and back to the sled, and the perimeter will be raised. He looked at her. His voice, without his quite intending it, dropped out of the register of the record and into something else. The bay is yours, whenever you are ready. Cass Dunmore stepped over the perimeter line. Nothing on the station recorded any change in the air, because there was no instrument built to record it, but every living thing in the bay felt it. The moment the small, unarmed human crossed the line and stood, at last, in the same open space as the animal she had raised. Up in the gallery, 3 days of arguments and 11 pages of assessment, and a year of treaty politics narrowed to a single bright room and a single small figure walking, unhurried, across 12 meters of daylit deck, toward a thing the whole galaxy had been unable to touch. She did not creep. That was what Vray would remember, and what he would tell the ones who asked him about it for years afterward. She did not creep and she did not stride. She walked the way a person walks toward something ordinary and beloved that is glad to see them, and she talked while she walked, low and steady, the words less important than the fact of them. "Look at you," she said. "Look at you standing there like you didn't just cost these people a house. You big embarrassing article. 5 days, I know. I know, it's over now. We're going to do one boring thing and then we're going home." The dog's whole body was one enormous wag. It did not lunge off the sled toward her. Vray braced for it, the whole gallery braced for it, 100 kilos of joy launching across 12 meters. But it did not, and Vray understood, watching, that this too was training, that somewhere in the years behind them she had taught it to wait, to hold, to let her come. And it was holding now, quivering with the effort of holding, its tail a blur, its front feet dancing a little on the ramp of the sled. Waiting for her to close the distance, because she had taught it that she always would. She reached the sled. She reached up, she had to reach up. The dog on the raised ramp was nearly at her height, and she put both hands on the sides of its great gray face, and the dog dropped its head into her hands and pressed its whole skull against her chest, and made the broken happy rumble again. And Cass Dunmore stood in the middle of a Class 9 containment with her arms around the head of an apex predator, and her face pressed into the fur between its ears. And for 3 seconds she was not a demonstration or a test case or the future of human integration. She was just a tired young woman who had gotten her dog back. "Okay," she said, muffled into the fur. Okay, come on, let's get your fat self weighed." She stepped back. She patted her thigh once, the oldest signal there was. "Biscuit," she said, "with me." The dog came off the sled. It came down the ramp on its bad hips, careful, deliberate, an old animal minding its joints, and it fell in at Cass Dunmore's left knee with the unhurried precision of a thing that had walked at that exact knee 10,000 times, and the two of them turned together toward the scale as though they were one animal with 2 spines, and Odals Vray, 40 years a clerk, stopped breathing, and up in the gallery the whole row of witnesses leaned as one toward the glass. They walked 12 meters of bright deck, and they crossed it at a stroll. The small stained human and the gray mountain at her knee matched pace for pace, her hand resting light and easy on the top of its heavy head, and the dog looking up at her every few steps the way it had looked up at her its whole life, checking, orienting, its entire attention gathered on the one small figure who had told it, a long time ago, that it did not have to be the thing the instruments said it was. It did not look at the gallery. It did not look at the scale. It did not look at the Korath, though the Korath's eyes tracked it the whole way with something that was almost worship. It looked at her. The most dangerous animal on the Osprith Reach walked across a room full of the people who feared it, and it never once took its eyes off the girl in the coffee-stained coveralls. And that Vrey understood it in his plates, the way Andrek had. That was the entire answer to every question the panel had come to ask. The dog was not calm because it was harmless. The dog was calm because she was there, and because a long time ago she had made it a promise, and it had spent 5 days in a box keeping its half of the promise, and now she was keeping hers. They reached the scale. Cass stepped up to the edge of the brushed alloy plate, and she did not step onto it herself. She stopped at its edge and she looked down at the dog, and she moved her hand, just her hand, a small flat gesture toward the plate, the gesture a person makes 1,000 times without thinking, and she said, in a voice pitched for one animal and no one else, "Up, go on up you get." The dog stepped onto the scale. It put one great forepaw on the plate, and then the other, and then it heaved its hindquarters up after them with an old dog's grunt, and it stood foursquare in the center of the plate in the pouring daylight, and it turned its head and looked at Cass to check that this was the thing she wanted, and she said, "Good, stay, good boy," and it stayed. Above the scale, the patient green figures that had read 0 for 2 days flickered, and climbed and settled. The whole bay watched them settle. The numbers hunted for a moment, the way a scale does under a shifting weight, and then the dog went still, deliberately still, a trained stillness, the stillness of an animal that had stood for a vet and a groomer and 100 boring human procedures and knew how to hold, and the figures locked. 92.7 kilograms. The instrument held it for the length of one full breath, and then it chimed a small, absurd domestic chime, the same chime it gave for a crate of fruit, and the number went from green to white, which was the instrument's way of saying recorded, and on Odell's Vray's pad in the field that had been empty for 2 days, the field labeled Mass, Standard, on line item 9A of Transit Manifest 44 Osprith, a number appeared. 92.7. Vray looked at it. 40 years of empty fields, and he had never once, in 40 years, felt about a filled field the way he felt about this one. "Logged," he said. His voice did not come out quite even. "The mass is logged. The specimen's mass is recorded and the manifest line is closed." He looked up at the gallery, at the panel, at the whole silent bright bay. "It is done. The transport may depart." For a moment, nobody moved. The dog stood on the scale in the daylight, 92.7 kilograms of recorded apex predator, and looked up at its person and swung its tail, and the tail swept slowly back and forth across the plate, and each sweep nudged the number 1/100th of a kilo one way and the other, and the instrument, having recorded, no longer cared, and neither did anyone else, because the thing the whole galaxy had been unable to do had just been done by a tired girl saying "Up you get" to her dog. And then the bay exhaled. It was not applause. Vray was glad later that it was not applause. Applause would have been the wrong species of thing, would have made it a performance, and it had not been a performance. It was a sound a room full of frightened people makes when the fear runs out of it all at once, a long collective release of held breath, a few low voices, someone in the overseer's staff laughing once, helplessly, and stopping. Up at the back of the gallery, the Korath lowered its plated head to the deck and let out a long, slow breath of its own and closed its eyes. Its vigil ended, its rank confirmed and honored and no longer requiring its attention. Assessor Kell had both hands pressed to the glass and was staring down at the scale like a man, watching a law of nature revise itself in real time. Postle was openly weeping in the way of a man who has just watched the thing he loves most be gentle. Down on the deck, Cass Dunmore paid the room no attention at all. "There," she told the dog. "There, see, boring. I told you it'd be boring." She reached into a pocket of the coveralls and produced, from some depth, a single battered biscuit, a real one, an earth one that she had apparently carried 3 decks and through 2 days of waiting for exactly this moment, and she held it up, and the dog took it off her flat palm with a delicacy that 4 professionals and a machine and an apex predator's handler would not, an hour before, have believed it capable of. Good. Good boy, off, come on. Off you get, let's not push our luck. She patted her thigh. The dog stepped off the scale, careful, hips, grunt, and fell back in at her knee. And the number above the plate dropped back to 0 and stayed there, recorded and irrelevant. And Cass turned the dog toward the sled and started to walk it back. And it was over. It was entirely over. The transfer that had defeated the finest hazard guild in the sector was concluded. And it had taken, from the moment she crossed the perimeter line to the moment the instrument chimed, a little under 2 minutes. Miss Dunmore, Vray said. She stopped. The dog stopped with her. The order requires the specimen returned to the sled and the perimeter raised, Vray said. But the order does not. He paused, and did a small illegal thing, the second in 2 days, and found he did not regret it. The order does not specify how long you may take about it. The transport does not depart for 4 hours. If you wish to sit with the animal a while in the bay before it is crated for passage, I would find it very difficult to notice. Cass looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said, and she did not take the dog back to the sled. She sat down, right there, on the bright deck of Weighing Bay 4 in the pouring daylight, in the middle of a Class 9 containment perimeter, and the dog folded itself down beside her with a groan of relief and put its great gray head in her lap and closed its eyes, and within a minute, Vray timed it, because he was a clerk and timing things was his trade. Within a minute the most dangerous animal on the Osprey reach was asleep, deeply and completely asleep, snoring. Its head in the lap of a girl in stained coveralls, in the sunlight, in front of the review panel that had come to decide whether her kind belonged in the civilized galaxy. Up in the gallery, the ancient scholar Vesalin watched the sleeping dog for a long time, and then it spoke, in its voice like water under ice, loud enough for the record. There, said Vesalin, that is the truth the Korath told us. I have waited 60 years to see it plainly, and I have never seen it plainer than this. The old cephalopod settled back into its harness. A predator that could empty this room, asleep in the open hand of the smallest thing in it. That is not a lucky species, Reviewer Andrek. Luck runs out. That is a bonded one. And a species that can hold that bond, that can raise a thing that strong and teach it to be that gentle, and have it believe them for 5 days alone in a box, is not a danger to the conquered. The dark eyes turned toward the row of the panel. It is the safest thing that has ever asked to join us. We have simply never before been asked to trust a people by how their monsters sleep. Reviewer Andrek came down from the gallery while the dog was still asleep. He came alone, and he came slowly, and the security detail moved to intercept him. The perimeter was still nominally live, but Vray waved them off, because he had watched Andrek's plates during the demonstration, and he knew the difference now. Everyone in the bay had learned the difference that day, between a thing approaching to threaten and a thing approaching because it could no longer stay away. Andrek stopped at the edge of the perimeter. 300 kilos of Drawk who had come to the reach to keep humanity behind a line, and he looked down at the small woman on the deck with the sleeping monster in her lap. May I approach, he said. I will not wake it. You can approach, Cass said quietly. He won't wake for you, he's had a long week. You'd have to be me to wake him right now. Andrek crossed the line and lowered himself, with the deliberate care of a large person minding a fragile moment, to sit on his heels a respectful arm's length from her. Up close the dog was even larger, and its head in her lap rose and fell with her breathing, and Andrek looked at it for a while. I inspected it yesterday, he said, directly, in the cell. I stood inside its range to prove it could be handled, and it looked at me, and it decided I did not matter, and it went back to sleep. I have handled dangerous animals my whole life, girl. I have never been dismissed by one. It ended something in me. I have been trying since yesterday to understand what. It didn't dismiss you, Cass said. That's the part you're all getting wrong still, even now. She stroked the sleeping dog's ear. He weighed you. That's different. He looked at you and worked out whether you were a threat to me, and you weren't, so he filed you under not my problem and went back to sleep. If you'd been a threat to me, reviewer, you'd have gotten a very different look and you'd have known it, and you still wouldn't have seen him move. That's the only thing that ever moves him, not himself, me. She looked up. He doesn't care what happens to him. Never has. He'd stand on a scale, get on a transport, sleep in a box for a week. None of it scares him because none of it's ever been about him. He's got exactly one job in the universe, and it's me, and everything else is just weather. And that does not frighten you, Andrek said. To be the one thing, to be the whole reason a creature like that decides whether a room lives or... He stopped himself. It's the least frightening thing in my life, Cass said simply. You want to know what's frightening, reviewer? Being small on a death world. Where I'm from, everything's bigger and faster and it all wants to eat you, and you spend your whole childhood learning that the universe is a thing that's trying to kill you. She looked down at the dog. And then you raise one of the things that used to be the nightmare, and you feed it and you teach it and you sleep next to it. And one day you realize the biggest, most dangerous thing for 100 kilometers has decided that you're what it protects. That's not frightening. That's the opposite of frightening. That's the first time in your life you're not alone with the dark. She shrugged. We didn't tame them because we're brave. We tamed them because we were scared, and we were tired of being scared, and it turned out the scariest thing on the whole planet would rather be your friend. Every human alive grew up knowing that in their bones. You people just found out this week. Andrek was quiet for a long moment. There was a filing, he said at last. My cousin's guild. The specimen cannot be handled by any means known to the guild. I called it a slander on my people. I have understood this hour that it was not a slander and it was not even wrong. It was simply incomplete. The guild's means are cradles and doses and poles, the means of force, and the specimen cannot be handled by any means of force. It can only be handled by the one thing the guild does not sell. He rose slowly to his full towering height and looked down at the girl and the sleeping monster in the daylight. I withdraw my recommendation, girl, all of it. I will say so on the record. I came here to keep your people behind a line, and I have spent a career arguing that you do not understand containment, and I was right, you do not. You understand something else. You understand the thing that makes containment unnecessary, and you learned it as children on a world that should have killed you, and you have been trying to explain it to us for a year, and we would not hear it because you kept saying it with a word we could not take seriously. His plates shifted in the Drock gesture of respect. Biscuit. You kept telling us his name was Biscuit, and we heard a joke, and it was not a joke. It was the whole answer. You named the deadliest thing in the room after a small soft food you give children, because to you that is what it is. I am ashamed it took me a year and a girl and a sleeping dog to hear it. He turned to go, and then he stopped and looked back, and asked the question Vray had been wanting to ask for 2 days and had not found the standing to. How many, Andrek said. The delegation, how many animals did you bring? On this transport, Cass said. Just him, he's mine. He came because he goes where I go. She scratched the dog's ear and it sighed in its sleep. But if you're asking how many the Corps has, how many Earth animals are working the integration up and down the delegation, a small dry smile touched her tired face, the first Vray had seen from her. Reviewer, he's a retired pet. 9 years old, bad hips, sleeps 20 hours a day. He's the gentlest, laziest, most washed-up old boy in the whole program. They only let him travel with me because I wouldn't come without him. She looked up at the towering Drock, and the smile stayed, dry and quiet and absolutely lethal in its mildness. He's the one we're not worried about. You spent a fortune and a guild's nerve and a review panel finding out that our easiest animal is more than your hardest one. The working ones are 3 decks down in the delegation kennel, and they're younger and they're faster and they're not retired. She laid her hand flat on the sleeping dog's side. You should be very glad the first one you met was Biscuit. He's the one who forgives. Reviewer Andrek looked at her for a long, long moment. I am going to recommend, he said slowly, that the conquered integrate humanity with all possible speed on the most favorable terms available, and that we never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to send us the ones that are not retired. He inclined his great plated head. Good day, Miss Dunmore. Thank you for the dog, and for the lesson. I will not forget either. He walked out of the bay, and up in the gallery Envoy Suth was already conferring with Vesalan in the low tones of a panel that has stopped deliberating and started drafting. And Overseer Casrith had the specific loosened posture of a station director who has just watched her reach, not become the station that could not process a dog. And Odals Vray stood at the perimeter line with a filled field on his pad, and watched a girl in stained coveralls sit in the sunlight with a sleeping apex predator's head in her lap, and understood that he had, at 40 years into a career of filling fields, finally filled one that mattered. Pole, he said. Pole appeared. Pole had come down from wherever Pole had been hiding, and Pole's translator had stopped whistling entirely, and Pole looked at the sleeping dog with an expression that was no longer fear. Officer. Log the transfer complete, Vray said. Method, registered keeper direct uncertified by discretionary order as a last resort. He paused. And append a note to the file for the Biosecurity Office for Assessor Kell's 11 pages. What note, officer? Vray looked at the girl and the dog in the daylight for a moment. Note that the classification stands, he said. Class 9. Apex confirmed. Do not soften it. The threat projection was correct and the Korath was correct and the guild was correct to be afraid. He watched the great gray flank rise and fall. But append that the register is incomplete and has always been incomplete because it has a field for what an animal could do and no field for who it has decided to do it for. Recommend the office add the field. Recommend they call it keeper. And recommend that for any Terran specimen the keeper field be read first, and the threat field second, and that no one Pole, put it in the strongest language the form permits, ever again spend a guild's fee and a station's nerve and 2 days of a good animal's patience learning what one small tired human could have told them at the gate for free. He turned toward the office and the long overdue rest of his day, because she did tell us, at the gate, 4 days ago. She said he was friendly, and we wrote it down, and we wrote not relevant next to it, and it was the only relevant thing in the file. The Draken Apex Transfer Guild came back before the steady hand departed. They had not, it turned out, left the station at all. Warden Sethrex Owl had taken his crew only as far as the transit docks, and there they had sat for 2 days, 6 of the finest hazard handlers in the sector, unable to leave and unable to return, caught in the specific paralysis of professionals who have failed at something for the first time and cannot stop turning it over. When word reached the docks that the transfer had been completed, that a human girl had walked the specimen onto the scale in under 2 minutes, Owl had come back to the weighing complex, alone, and found Vray in his office, and stood in the doorway with his cracked Tanville face and his one milky eye, and said nothing for a while. It is done, Vray said. 92.7 kilograms. The manifest is closed. How? She asked it to get on the scale, Vray said. It got on the scale, she gave it a biscuit, it got off. He set down his stylus. It took her under 2 minutes, Warden, and there was no method in it and no trick, and I have spent 2 days waiting to feel vindicated, and instead I mostly feel that we owe your guild an apology, because you were the only ones honest enough to run. Owl came into the office and lowered himself into the chair across the desk, and the chair, designed for Saren clerks, protested. I have moved things that kill for 60 years, he said. I have never abandoned a contract, not once. It is the first line of the guild oath we carry what kills, and I stood in that bay and I could not make my hands hold the pole and I have spent 2 days believing I had broken the oath. He looked at Vray. Tell me I did not break the oath. You watched it happen. You are a clerk. You do not flatter. Tell me true. Did I break the oath, or did the oath simply not have a line for what that animal was? Vray considered it, because Owl deserved a considered answer. The oath says we carry what kills, Vray said. You did not break it, you upheld it. That animal does not kill, Warden. That is the entire thing your instruments could not measure and your nerve could not survive. It could kill, the projection is real, the number is real, but it does not, and it will not because a small human told it long ago that it did not have to, and it believed her. Your oath is to carry what kills. You were asked to carry something that had been forgiven, and no oath in the galaxy prepares a handler for that, because force is your whole trade and you cannot force a thing that has already decided to be gentle. You did not fail the specimen. You correctly identified that it was outside your covenant and you withdrew. That is not cowardice. That is a professional recognizing the edge of his profession. He paused. The girl said something like it in fewer words. She said you move what kills, and you do not move what forgives, because a thing that forgives can stop. Al was silent for a moment. She said that. She did. Then she understands my trade better than the panel does, Owl said, and something in his cracked face eased, the particular relief of a proud man told by an honest one that his shame was misplaced. Officer, I will pay the abandonment penalty. In full. I will not contest it, but I will ask one thing of you, clerk to clerk, and you may refuse it. Ask. When you file the record, Owl said, do not write that the guild fled in terror. It will be read that way for 100 years. The guild that ran from a dog, and my people will carry it, and some of it we have earned. But write the true thing under it. Write that the guild correctly identified an animal outside the reach of force, and withdrew rather than harm it or die pretending otherwise. Write that we were the first of everyone on this station to understand what the animal was, that it was not a beast to be broken but a bond we had no right to touch. We ran, officer, but we ran because we saw it clearly and soonest. Let the record say we saw it. He rose, and the chair sighed with relief. That is worth more to my guild than the fee. Give us that and we are square. I will write it, Vray said. In the strongest language the form permits. You have my word, Warden. And for what it is worth from a clerk, the record will also show that when every certified method had failed, it was your filing, your honest sentence about the limits of force, that gave the overseer the ground to let the girl try. You did not merely run well, Warden. You ran usefully. Your honesty is half the reason the manifest closed at all. Owl stood in the doorway a moment longer. The humans, he said, the panel will integrate them. The panel is drafting the recommendation now. Good, said Owl. Tell them from the guild, the real guild, not the filing, that we withdraw every objection, and that we would sooner share a transit lane with a people who raise such things and teach them mercy than with any people who could not. He inclined his broad head. We carry what kills. They carry what forgives. It is a better trade than ours, and I have waited 60 years to learn there was a better trade. And he went back to his crew at the docks, to pay a penalty he no longer counted as shame. The Concord codified the dog 3 days later, and it was, Vray thought, watching it happen, the most solemn thing he had ever seen done about the most ordinary thing in the universe. The review panel did not merely recommend integration. Envoy Suth, with Vesalin's dark insistence behind her and Andrek's withdrawn objection clearing the way, drafted a provision, an actual clause, entered into the Concord's biosecurity code, binding on every way station in the reach. And the provision was about a leash and a word, and the small flat gesture a person makes toward a scale. It was called, in the final language, Provision 12, the presentation of the keeper. Vray read the draft as it came through his office, because everything came through his office, and he read it twice, because it was so strange. Where a Terran origin auxiliary specimen is classified Apex or above, the provision read, no transfer shall be attempted by force, remote apparatus, or chemical means. The registered keeper shall be presented. The keeper shall conduct the specimen by voice and hand. Certification of the keeper shall consist solely of the specimen's recognition of the keeper, which no instrument shall be required to measure, and no officer shall be permitted to doubt. The bond is the certification. The keeper's word is the containment. Where the keeper is present, the perimeter is the leash. There were subclauses. There were subclauses about how the biosecurity office must henceforth record the keeper before the threat. A keeper field read first, and a threat field read second, exactly as Vray had recommended in his note, and he permitted himself a small clerk's pride at seeing his language survive into code. There were subclauses codifying the daylight, because the code held that the specimens were calmest in the primaries noon, and someone on the panel had noticed that the girl and the dog had done their impossible thing in a pouring bright bay, and the panel had solemnly written the daylight into the doctrine, so that henceforth every keeper presentation across the reach would be conducted in the brightest room a station could offer, in imitation of a bay on the Osprey reach where a monster had slept in a sunbeam. And there was a final subclause, added at Vesalin's insistence, that Vray read a dozen times and never entirely got over. The command by which the keeper conducts the specimen, it read, shall be recorded in the transfer log verbatim, in the keeper's own tongue, as a matter of respect. In the founding instance, the command was, with me. They wrote with me into the biosecurity code of the conquered. 2 human words, said by a tired girl to an old dog, entered into galactic law as the founding instance of a doctrine, and Vray thought about the girl brushing the air where the dog should be, and about the 11 pages that had said the friendliness was not relevant, and about how the whole vast apparatus of a starfaring civilization had spent 5 days and a fortune and a guild's nerve learning to write down, in solemn language, in permanent code, the thing she had said to them at the gate for free. They made it a law, Pole said, reading over his shoulder. The dog, they made the dog a law. They made the bond a law, Vray said. The dog was always the law. We simply refused to read it. He filed the provision and appended it to line item 9A and closed Transit Manifest 44 Osprey at last, 41 other manifests unlocking behind it, and somewhere in the docks the steady hand woke its drives. Officer, Pole said, may I ask you something? You may. Were you ever afraid of it, the dog, in all of this? Everyone was afraid of it, the guild, the physician, the Korath, even me. Were you? Vray considered the question honestly, because Pole had earned an honest answer over 5 long days. No, he said, I was afraid of the empty field. I have always been afraid of the empty field. It is the only thing a clerk fears. The dog was never the problem. The dog knew exactly what it was and exactly what it was for, and a thing that knows what it is for is the safest thing in any room. It was the rest of us who did not know what we were for, the guild that thought it was for force, the register that thought it was for threats, the panel that thought it was for saying no. We were the dangerous ones, Pole. We nearly turned a whole people back because we could not read our own file. The dog just wanted to get weighed and go home with its person. He set down his stylus for the last time that day. I have filled empty fields for 40 years, and I have never once been endangered by an animal, and I have been endangered 100 times by a room full of frightened officials with good walls and bad instincts. The girl knew that at 23. It took me 40 years. That is the humbling of it. Cass Dunmore walked her dog to the steady hand through corridors that had changed since she'd come the other way. 5 days ago she had walked these same corridors alone, a small tired human in stained coveralls, and the aliens had drawn back from her, the way people draw back from someone carrying something they can't identify, and she had felt every one of the meters between herself and every one of them. Now she walked with Biscuit at her knee, no crate, no cradle, no escort of mourners, just a leash she carried loosely because she never needed it, and the corridors did not draw back. They stopped. Sarin clerks and Drock dockhands and a knot of scaled cadets on some errand all stopped where they stood and watched the girl and the gray monster go by, and there was no fear in it anymore. There was something Cass had not expected and did not entirely know what to do with, which was that they had started to look at the dog the way she looked at the dog, as though it were a marvel, as though it were a good boy. "They're staring at you," she told him. "You like that. Don't pretend you don't like that." Biscuit walked at her knee and did not care who stared, because none of them were her, and every few steps he looked up to check that she was still the center of the universe, and she still was, and so all was well. Assessor Kell was waiting at the dock with his pad and his 11 pages. "Miss Dunmore," he said, and he had the awkward formality of a man who has been wrong in a professional capacity and has decided to be graceful about it. "I wish to give you these before you departed." He held out the pad. "The behavioral log, all 4 days of it. I kept it, every hour. It is, I am told it is the most complete observational record of a bonded Terran apex in Concord files, and I thought its keeper should have a copy. It is mostly the specimen sleeping. There is a great deal of the specimen sleeping." He paused. "There is an entry on the 3rd day that I have flagged. The specimen leaned against the observation glass and went asleep against it, and I wrote at the time that I could not understand why an apex predator would render itself so vulnerable, and I have since understood that it was not rendering itself vulnerable. It had simply decided the room was safe, and it wished to sleep, and where it comes from a safe place to sleep is the rarest thing there is, and it takes them where it finds them." He looked at the dog. "I classified it at 9, Miss Dunmore, and I stand behind the classification, and I have spent 5 days ashamed of nothing except the sentence I wrote next to friendly. I have struck the sentence. The record now reads that the friendliness is the most relevant fact in the file. Thank you for teaching me to read my own assessment." "You watched him," Cass said, taking the pad. "That's more than the rest of them did. You're all right, Kell." She scratched the dog's ear. "He liked you, you know, as much as he likes anyone who isn't me. You were the one who brought him the extra blanket on the 2nd day. He remembers things like that. He'll remember you." Kell, a Sarin biosecurity assessor of many years' hard-won composure, had to look away for a moment. Postle was at the dock too, with the Koreth. The Koreth had insisted on coming. Postle explained it with the helpless shrug of a man whose partner had made a decision, and it walked at his side on no leash, the second most dangerous animal on the station, and it came up to within a careful distance of Biscuit and stopped, and lowered its great plated head, and Biscuit stopped too, and the two of them regarded each other across a meter of dock in the daylight streaming down from the dome. "She wanted to see it off," Postle said quietly. I've stopped trying to explain what she does. She hasn't been the same since the bay, calmer, like something got settled in her." He watched the 2 animals. "I think she needed to know it was leaving as a friend and not a rival. I think that mattered to her. Is that mad?" "That sounds mad." "It's not mad," Cass said. "He's telling her the same thing, watch." And the old dog did the thing he had done in the bay. The single slow deliberate wag once, a nod between apexes, and the Koreth's plates lowered along its spine, the tension of 5 days going out of it all at once, and it made a low sound deep in its chest that Postle had never heard it make. And Biscuit answered with a soft chuff. And it was done, whatever it was, the oldest conversation there is, conducted in a language with no words and no lies. And the 2 animals turned away from each other satisfied, rank acknowledged, peace made, and neither of them ever looked back. "She'll be all right now," Cass said. "So will he." They said what they needed to. She started up the ramp and stopped and looked back at Postle. "Take care of her, she's a good one. She yielded in that bay because she's honest, not because she's weak. That's a rare animal you've got. Don't let anyone tell you different because she lay down." Postle nodded, not trusting himself to speak, one hand on the great plated head of his partner, and the girl and the dog went up the ramp together. Odell's Vray was at the top of it. "Miss Dunmore," he said, "I came to see the field closed in person. It is not a thing a clerk usually does." But it was not a usual field. He looked at the dog, and the dog looked back at him with the mild, patient warmth it gave to everyone who was not a threat to her, and Vray, who had not been afraid of it in the bay, found he was not afraid of it now, and was a little sorry the whole thing was ending. "I wished also to tell you that the panel has ruled. Humanity is to be integrated on the most favorable terms in a generation. Reviewer Andrek carried the motion himself. The vote was unanimous. Your dog got your whole species into the civilized galaxy by sleeping in a sunbeam. And I do not think history will ever quite believe it, and I was there, and I am not sure I believe it either. He'd hate that, Cass said. Being important, he'd absolutely hate it. He just wanted to get weighed and go home. She smiled, tired and dry. Do me a favor, Officer Vray. When they write it all down, the provision, the founding instance, all of it, don't make him a hero. He's not a hero. He's a lazy old dog with bad hips who loves one person and can't be bothered with anything else. That's not heroism. That's just what they are when you raise them right. Make sure the record says that. That the galaxy nearly lost its nerve over an animal whose only ambition was a nap and a biscuit. She paused at the airlock. That's the real story. Not that he was dangerous. That he was dangerous and it never once occurred to him to be, because he had somewhere better to put all that. That's the thing your instruments can't measure, and it's the only thing that ever mattered. The record says it, Vray said. In the strongest language the form permits. I wrote it myself. He inclined his long gray head. Safe passage, Miss Dunmore, and to the dog. He hesitated, a clerk of 40 years reaching for something outside his register. Thank him for me, for being what he was. It has changed how a great many frightened people will read a very great many files for a very long time. He will never know that. But you might tell him he was a good. Vray stopped and found the human word Kell had taught him and used it carefully as a man handles something that is not his but that he has been trusted with. A good boy. Tell him he was a good boy, from the Waits and Manifest office of the Osprith Reach, with the compliments of a clerk who was very glad in the end to fill his field. Cass Dunmore's eyes did something, finally, that she had not let them do in 5 days, and she blinked it back and she nodded once and she said, I'll tell him, and she took her dog through the airlock and home. The next one came through 5 months later, and Odell's Vray handled it in 11 minutes. It was a smaller animal, a lean black and white herding dog belonging to a human agronomist bound for a soil survey posting, and the gate scanner flagged it the way the gate scanner flagged all of them now. A spike of red across every threat channel and a small automated note that the projection might be a malfunction because nothing produced that number. 5 months ago the flag would have started a panic. It would have summoned assessors and drafted guild contracts and locked a transport in dock, while frightened officials hid behind good walls. Now it summoned Vray, who came down to the gate with his pad and pole at his shoulder, and looked at the readout, and looked at the animal, which was sitting at the human's heel with its ears up and its whole body vibrating with the desire to be given a job, and said the words that had become, in 5 months, as routine as any other line of code on the Osprith Reach. Present the keeper, Vray said. The human agronomist who had braced for the fight every human braced for blinked. You sorry, you're not going to. Provision 12, Vray said. Terran auxiliary specimen apex classified. No force, no apparatus, no chemical. The registered keeper conducts the specimen by voice and hand. You are the registered keeper. The scale is in the bright bay through that hatch. Walk your dog onto it, hold it for a breath and walk it off, and we will log the mass and you will make your connection. He almost smiled. The daylight in the bay is regulation, by the way. We keep it bright by law now. There is a whole subclause. You will find it very comfortable. The agronomist walked the herding dog into the bright bay and onto the scale, and it stood, quivering, delighted to have a task, and the figures locked, and the instrument chimed its absurd domestic chime, and Vray filled the field. 11 minutes, gate to logged. Pole timed it because Pole had learned from the best. 11 minutes, Pole said afterward in the office. 5 months ago it took 5 days and a guild's nerve and nearly the whole human integration. 11 minutes. Because we read the right field first, Vray said. The keeper field. It is always the keeper field. We simply had to be taught to read it, and it cost us 5 days and a fortune and a very great deal of dignity to learn, and now it costs 11 minutes, and that is the whole history of every worthwhile thing an institution has ever learned. He filed the herding dog's mass. The teaching is expensive. The knowing is cheap. The trick is surviving the distance between them without turning anyone back. Word had spread in 5 months in the way word spreads through a reach, carried on transports, retold in dockside canteens, growing and shrinking and never quite dying. The story of the girl and the monster on the Osprey reach had become, across the sector, a kind of parable, and it had done a thing that no human diplomat in a year of negotiation had managed to do. It had changed how the galaxy pictured humanity. The conquered had spent a year picturing the humans as a death-world species, grim and dangerous and best kept behind a line, a people forged hard by a world that killed the weak. And they were that. Every human alive was that. But the story of Biscuit had hung a second picture beside the first, and the second picture would not come down, and it was the picture that had won the audit. A small, tired girl sitting in a sunbeam with the deadliest thing in the room asleep in her lap, its head a trusting weight against her, because she had raised it and fed it and told it long ago that it did not have to be the nightmare, and it had believed her, and it believed her still. That was the thing the conquered had not been able to look away from, not that the humans were dangerous. Everyone was dangerous, given a bad enough world. It was that the humans had taken the most dangerous things their death world could produce and taught them mercy, and lived alongside them, and slept next to them, and named them after small, soft foods, and that a people who could do that, who could stand at the top of a killing world and use the position to make friends instead of subjects, were not a danger to be contained. They were, as Vessalin had said into the record in a bright bay 5 months before, the safest thing that had ever asked to join, and the galaxy had simply never before been asked to trust a people by how their monsters slept. Reviewer Andrek had said something similar, later, in a speech Vray had read, closing the integration debate before the full conquered. Vray had kept a copy of the closing line, because it was the kind of line a clerk keeps. We asked the humans for soldiers, Andrek had said, because we thought a death world would breed soldiers, and we were afraid of what it would send us. And they did not send soldiers. They sent a girl and her retired dog on a routine transport, not even as a demonstration. She brought him because she would not travel without him. That is the part I cannot get past, colleagues. It was not a show of force. It was a girl who loved her dog. And it defeated a year of my objections in under 2 minutes, and it will be law longer than any of us live. And I have come to believe that this is the correct order of things, that a people should be measured not by the soldiers they send, but by the friends they keep, and that by that measure the humans outrank us all, because they made friends of the things that should have eaten them, and they did it out of loneliness and love and stubbornness on a world that gave them every reason to do otherwise. We wanted their soldiers. Thank every quiet god they sent us the dog instead. Vray filed the speech. He filed everything, it was his trade. And sometimes, on the long quiet shifts, he pulled up line item 9A of the closed transit manifest 44 Osprey, and looked at the field that had once been empty and was now, permanently, filled 92.7 kilograms, and thought about the girl brushing the air where her dog should be, and about the Koreth lying down, and about a guild that had run because it saw clearly and soonest, and about a review panel that had come to say no and had been unmade by a nap in a sunbeam. "Do you ever wonder where they are now?" Pole asked him once. "The girl, the dog." "Somewhere with soil," Vray said. "She said the working ones were the young, fast ones, and that he was the retired one, the lazy one, the one they weren't worried about. So he is retired wherever he is. On a porch, I should think, if humans have porches. In a sunbeam, he liked sunbeams." He closed the file. He would be older now. He was old then, 9 and slow in the hips and gray in the muzzle. 5 months is not long for us. It is longer for them. He was quiet a moment. "I hope he has his sunbeam, Pole. I hope it is a good one and that it lasts and that the girl is in it with him and that neither of them ever has to be important again as long as they live. they earned that. They earned a very great deal of nothing happening in the sun for as long as it holds. He had his sunbeam. It fell across the boards of a porch on a world called Marrow's Landing, a soil-and water colony 3 jumps past the Osprey Reach, where humanity had been given, as part of the favorable terms reviewer Andrek carried through the Concord, a stake in the terraforming survey and a strip of the temperate belt to work. The primary was a mild yellow star, and the afternoons were long and golden, and the porch faced west into them. And every afternoon at the same hour the light came up over the boards and pooled warm in one particular corner. And every afternoon at the same hour an old gray-muzzled Mastiff heaved himself up off the cool grass, climbed the 2 steps with a grunt and a great deal of negotiation between himself and his hips, and lowered himself into the warm corner with a groan of profound satisfaction, and slept. Cass Dunmore worked the survey. It was good work, real work, soil and seed and water tables, the slow, patient business of teaching a world how to feed people, and she was good at it, and she liked the quiet of it after 2 years of transports and paperwork and translating her dog to frightened officials. She had a small house at the edge of the human strip, and a porch, and a job that let her keep her boots muddy and her hands busy, and the one thing in the galaxy that was entirely hers slept in a sunbeam a few meters from wherever she was working, and lifted his head every so often to check that she was still there, and she always was. The colony had aliens in it. Marrow's Landing was a mixed posting, sarin hydrologists, a crew of Drawk earthmovers, a delegation of the feathered inland people doing atmospheric work, all of them living in the same long golden afternoons under the same mild star, and every one of them had at first been afraid of the dog. Cass had expected that. She was used to it by now. What she had not entirely expected was how fast it went away, and how completely, once people lived alongside him instead of reading his file. The Drawk earthmovers had been the worst of it at the start, big plated people, the same kind as the guild that had run, and they knew the story, everyone in the sector knew the story, and they gave the porch a wide berth for the first weeks. And then one afternoon, a young Drawk earthmover named Torsk had been walking the path past Cass's house when the old dog, sunbeam warm and half asleep, had heaved himself up and come down the steps and crossed the yard to him, slow, tail going, and had just leaned, the whole 100 kilos of him, against Torsk's plated leg, the way he leaned on everyone he had decided to like, and had looked up with his soft brown eyes and his gray muzzle and waited to be scratched. And Torsk, 300 kilos of Drawk who had grown up on the story of the monster that unmade a review panel, had stood frozen for a long moment with his heart's hammering, and then had reached down one enormous plated hand and scratched the old dog behind the ears, and the old dog had groaned and pressed harder, and something in the young Drawk's face had broken open, and he had sat down right there in the path and let the monster lean on him and scratched him for 20 minutes, and had gone home changed. After that the porch was never quite empty of visitors. The Drawk earthmovers brought the dog scraps they pretended they had not saved from their own meals. The sarin hydrologists, a formal people, developed a formal relationship with him, and would incline their long gray heads to him gravely as they passed, and the old dog would thump his tail at them gravely in return, and honor was satisfied on both sides. A sarin child, there were families here now. That was the thing about favorable terms. Families came. A sarin child named Elu had decided the dog was hers, and lay against his warm flank in the sunbeam most afternoons and read to him in a piping voice from a reader that translated her stories into a language he did not understand and did not need to, and the old dog let her, and slept, and was, by every measure Cass could see, completely and uncomplicatedly happy. They still knew what he was. That was the thing that had changed and the thing that had not. The file still said Class 9. The projection was still real. The number was still real. If Marrow's Landing had ever faced the thing every Deathworld animal was bred against, a real threat, a predator, a raider, some genuine danger to the small, soft people the dog had decided were his. Then the colony would have learned in about 3 seconds exactly what the 11 pages had been trying to tell them. They knew that. They had simply stopped being afraid of it, because they had learned the thing it had taken the Osprey Reach 5 days and a fortune to learn. That the number was what he could do, and the animal was what he did. And what he did was lean on people until they sat down, and sleep in sunbeams, and let a child read to him, and love one muddy-booted young woman with the whole of his enormous retired heart. The provision reached Marrow's Landing eventually, the way official things eventually reach everywhere. A copy of the full Concord Biosecurity Code, updated, distributed to every posting, and someone in the colony administration had flagged Provision 12 and sent it to Cass, thinking she would want to see it, the founding instance, her own 2 words entered into galactic law. With me. She had read it on the porch in the golden afternoon with the old dog asleep in his corner, and she had read the subclause about the daylight, the one that required every keeper presentation across the reach to be conducted in the brightest room a station could offer, in imitation of a bay where a monster had once slept in a sunbeam, and she had looked up from the reader at her own dog asleep in his own sunbeam on his own porch, and she had laughed quietly so as not to wake him. "You hear that, buddy?" she'd said. "They made the sunbeam a law. There's a whole galaxy out there weighing dogs in the bright now because you like to nap in the sun." The old dog's ear had twitched at her voice, and his tail had thumped once against the boards without his bothering to wake up. "You have no idea, do you? None. You're a law of the Concord and you're famous in 9 systems and you trade the whole thing for a scrap of what Torsk's not saving from his lunch." She'd set the reader down. "That's why it's you. That's why it was always going to be you. You never wanted any of it. You just wanted this." And she had reached over and laid her hand on his warm gray side and felt it rise and fall and left it there a while. He was older now. That was the thing under the golden afternoons, the thing Cass did not look at directly but knew, the way you know the shape of a room in the dark. 9 had become nearly 10. The hips were worse. The gray had climbed from his muzzle up around his eyes. He slept more and rose slower, and the 2 steps up to the porch took more negotiating than they used to. And some mornings he was stiff for a long while before the sun warmed him loose. She had started carrying him up the steps on the bad mornings, all 100 kilos of him, staggering, while he bore it with the patient dignity of a creature who had let her do whatever she needed to do to him since he was 8 weeks old. She did not think about how many golden afternoons were left. She had decided, a long time ago on a death world, that the way you loved a thing was not by counting what was left of it but by being worth it while it lasted, and she was being worth it, every muddy-booted golden-lit day of it, and that was the whole of what she knew how to do and the whole of what he had ever asked. There was a clerk 3 jumps away on the Osprey Reach, who sometimes pulled up a closed manifest on a quiet shift and wondered where they were and hoped the old dog had his sunbeam. He did. He had the best sunbeam on Marrow's Landing, on a west-facing porch under a mild yellow star, in a colony full of aliens who had learned to bring him scraps and scratch his ears and read to him in the long gold light, and he spent it the way he had always intended to spend everything. From the first day, a small scared human had picked him up and decided the 2 of them would face the dark together, asleep and warm and unbothered, and close enough to her that he could lift his head and find her whenever he needed to be sure. Cass finished her survey notes as the light went amber. The old dog woke, the way he woke every evening, at the exact moment the sunbeam left his corner, and he lifted his gray head and looked around and found her, and heaved himself up, and came and put his great heavy skull in her lap, and sighed the enormous sigh of a creature whose day had contained everything a day needed to contain, and nothing it did not. "Good day, buddy," she said. His tail moved slow against the boards. "Yeah," Cass said. "Me too." She scratched behind his ears the way she had scratched behind his ears 10,000 times, in bunks and transports and boxes, and now here, at the mild golden edge of a world they were teaching to grow things, 3 jumps and a whole changed galaxy away from a bright bay where he had gotten on a scale because she asked him to. You know what the funny thing is? All of them, the whole galaxy, they spent a fortune being scared of you. And you never once, not for 1 second of your whole life, gave anybody a real reason. She rested her hand on his head. That's the secret. That's the thing they wrote a law about and still didn't understand. It was never that you were dangerous, buddy. Everything's dangerous where we come from. It's that you were dangerous, and you decided not to be because I asked you to, and you kept deciding it every single day for 10 years without me ever having to ask twice. The amber light was going to rose now, the long, slow sunset of Marrow's Landing coming on. That's not a monster. That's the best thing our whole terrible, beautiful death world ever made. And they can keep their provision and their founding instance and their 9 systems. She bent and put her forehead against his, the way she had in the bright bay, the way she had 1,000 times. You're just my dog. You were always just my dog. And that was always going to be enough to end any argument in the galaxy, because it's the biggest thing there is. And it took the whole conquered 5 days and a fortune to find out what I've known since you were 8 weeks old. The old dog leaned his weight against her in the failing gold light and closed his eyes and slept, and the porch was warm, and the woman sat still so as not to wake him, and 3 jumps away a clerk closed a file, and the light held a while longer, and nothing at all happened in the sun for as long as it lasted, which was, in the end, exactly what the 2 of them had always wanted, and exactly what they had earned, and exactly enough.